I knew the bridge was going to fall before the first rope snapped. The river had already climbed over the lower stones, and Kelm's wagon was halfway across. With enough seed grain for half of Rhyme Hollow, Mira stood on the far bank. With Iva beneath her blue shawl, Hob was under the bridge, shouting that the center post had shifted. The driver froze. I had a rope, one heavy arrow, and perhaps 3 breaths before the road to the south disappeared into the river. The first rope parted with a dry crack. The wagon lurched toward the upstream rail. One rear wheel rose from the planks. The pony screamed and fought the traces while brown water hammered the bridge supports below. Taren dropped to one knee on the northern bank. Late spring rain had polished every board and darkened his gray hunting coat. His black hair clung to his forehead, except for the broad silver lock at his left temple. Cold green eyes measured the tree fork across the flood beneath the thin scar through his left eyebrow. He looped the end of Hob's thin guide cord through the socket behind a heavy arrowhead and drew the black yew bow. The weapon had once creaked under the pull of 3 fingers. Now its limbs were almost black, with silver grain running through them like frost trapped in wood. The faded blue binding near the upper limb remained where Mira had repaired it through their first winter. Few men in Rhyme Hollow could bend the bow far enough to set an arrow. Taren drew until the string reached his cheek. The bridge dropped another finger's width. Hob was still beneath it. He had crawled onto a crossbeam to inspect the central post when the flood shifted the stone packing. His broad shoulders were wedged between 2 braces, and one boot had lost purchase above the water. He shouted for the wagon driver to cut the pony free. The man stared at the bucking animal and did nothing. Taren aimed beyond the bridge at a forked black pine on the southern bank. The rain pushed from west to east. The guide cord dragged against his wrist. He adjusted half a handspan, released, and watched the heavy arrow cross the river. It struck the fork and passed through a rotten outer branch. The shaft buried itself in the living trunk behind it. Brock caught the trailing cord. The huge former lodge enforcer had a shaved head, a rust-colored beard, a broken nose that made every expression look like an argument, and a bare ear where his old tusk earring had hung. He wrapped the cord around a riverside post and pulled until it hummed. Taren clipped the thicker rescue rope to it. Send it across. Brock and 2 farmers hauled. The guide cord carried the rescue rope over the river and through the iron ring beneath the arrowhead. Hob reached up from the crossbeam and caught it on the second swing. Another bridge rope snapped. The wagon bed tilted. One grain sack slid against the sideboard and split. Barley spilled through the slats, vanishing into the flood like pale sand. Mira moved before anyone ordered her. She handed Iva to Zelda, gathered the southern bank workers, and pointed them toward the rope. Her copper-red braid lay dark against the blue shawl, and her amber-brown eyes stayed fixed on the failing rope. 5 months after giving birth, the softness had returned to her face. The work had put strength back into her arms. She set both hands on the line beside people twice her size. Taren crossed first. He hooked one leg over the rope and moved hand over hand above the brown water. Wolf endurance kept his breathing steady. The balance gathered from frost deer and later hunts held his body beneath the line when the bridge shook. The distance was little more than 30 paces, yet the river made every one of them loud. The central support shifted again. Hob looked up. Now would be a fine time to become lighter. Taren dropped from the rope onto the wagon bed. The driver sat rigid on the bench, with both hands around the reins. He was a thin southern man, with rainwater streaming from the brim of his hat. He had already hauled the pony halfway around in an attempt to retreat, so its head faced the southern bank while the trapped wagon still angled north. The pony had twisted one trace around its foreleg. If it fell, the harness would drag the wagon sideways and take the remaining bridge rail with it. Taren cut the left trace with Mira's old skinning knife. The pony lunged forward, freed one shoulder, and nearly went over the rail. Taren caught the bridle close to the bit. Boar strength stopped the animal from pulling him off his feet. though the wet boards slid under his boots. He placed the reins in the driver's hands and made the man look at him. "When I touch your shoulder, take the pony straight ahead. Do not turn. Do not stop for the wagon." The driver's jaw moved without sound. Taren struck the man's shoulder. The driver kicked loose from the wagon and ran beside the pony. The southern workers pulled from the far bank. The animal scrambled over the remaining planks and reached solid ground. The wagon did not follow. Its rear axle dropped through the deck. The bed slammed down, pinning the wheel between two beams. Grain sacks rolled toward the broken side. Hob had looped the rescue rope around his chest. Taren pulled him from beneath the bridge as the lower brace tore free. Together, they climbed onto the wagon. 7 sacks still whole, Hob said. 2 split. The iron chest is under the driver's bench. The chest held seed tools and metal fittings, not treasure. Kelm had spent winter profits buying them from the south, and every farmer on the bank knew what those iron blades meant after months of repairing tools with scraps. Taren looked at the bridge. The upstream rails had separated from the central section. The crossbeams were bending. They had time to save people and perhaps one kind of cargo. He chose both by changing the order. Hob tied 3 whole grain sacks to the overhead rope. Southern workers dragged them across, one at a time. Taren shoved the iron chest onto the front board, split the wagon's retaining pin with the butt of his knife, and freed the bed from the trapped axle. Brock saw his intention. He shouted for everyone on the banks to clear the downstream shallows. Taren and Hob rolled the remaining sacks against the front wall. Then Taren cut the last harness line that still connected the wagon to the escaped pony. The bridge gave way. The central deck dropped into the river. The loose wagon bed slid along it like a sled, struck the broken rail, and turned downstream. Taren jumped onto the overhead rope. Hob caught his coat and missed. For one instant, the carpenter rode the wagon bed toward the flood. Taren locked his left arm around the rope and caught Hob's wrist with his right hand. The sudden weight pulled his shoulder hard enough to tear the old scar beneath his coat. His fingers held. The gift of the black-backed wolverine did not exist yet. He had only the strength earned through winter, the calloused hand that had carried climbers on another mountain, and the knowledge that letting go was not an option. Brock and the bank workers hauled them sideways. Hob swung above the water, boots striking spray. The wagon bed smashed into a riverside boulder below them. 2 sacks vanished. The iron chest wedged against the front wall and stayed. They reached the southern bank together. The remaining bridge section collapsed 30 breaths later. Rain continued falling on the wreckage. Broken planks turned in the flood. The pony stood trembling near a willow, and the driver pressed his forehead against its wet neck. No one had died. Mira counted what remained before relief could blur the loss. 3 grain sacks had crossed on the line. 2 more had stayed inside the wagon bed with the iron chest. 1 split sack lay on the southern stones, wet along the bottom but recoverable. 3 sacks had gone into the river, including the one that burst first. She marked each saved sack with charcoal and assigned a person to guard it. The iron chest belonged to Kelm. The grain already had household owners. Flood and panic did not change either fact. The 3 lost sacks belonged to 4 households, and Mira entered every missing share beside its owner's name. Jory's rye allotment had been in the first sack that burst. The common reserve could replace only 1/4 of it before planting. Taren stood beside her, while Selda returned Iva. Their daughter had dark hair with a pale lock above her brow, and Mira's amber eyes. She had spent the collapse gripping the edge of the blue shawl and making a low, offended sound whenever thunder covered the shouting. Mira checked the cut on Taren's palm, then looked at the ruined bridge. How long? Hob climbed from the bank with mud to his chest. His square face had gone gray beneath a short brown beard. He wiped rain from his eyes and studied the remaining stone piers. A light footbridge could be raised in 4 or 5 days, he explained. A rope ferry could carry people and small loads sooner. Heavy wagons were another matter. The old central post had been patched too many times, and the western pier had shifted. A new bridge needed seasoned black pine, which the village had, and iron straps, long spikes, hinge plates, and 2 lengths of heavy chain, which it did not. Kelm approached, while removing one orange wool glove finger by finger. His black mustache drooped with rain. He looked at the river, the saved grain, and the wagon bed trapped against the boulder. "My spring profit is floating toward the coast," he said. "I dislike the coast. It never pays on time." Mira informed him that 5 full sacks, most of a sixth, and his iron chest remained recoverable. Kelm's eyes sharpened. He began calculating before she finished. The southern caravan had brought another man to the river. He stood beneath a dark oilcloth held by an assistant and watched a villager's work. Male Varro was tall and narrow-shouldered, with straight dark chestnut hair tied low at his neck. A long dark teal traveling coat fell almost to his boots. Black gloves covered his hands. A silver chain at his belt held 6 small merchant weights, and he rolled a brass half-crown weight between 2 fingers while he studied the broken crossing. His pale gray eyes moved from the black bow in Taren's hand to the huge saber-cat skull mounted above the common store uphill. He asked Kelm whether that was the white mane of the northern valley. Kelm put his orange glove back on. The part that did not fit inside the hall. Mail looked at Taren again. By evening, ropes stretched across the river, and a work crew had recovered the wagon bed. The grain went to the common hall to dry under Mira's ledger. The iron chest contained 6 axe heads, 4 plow points, a box of nails, and 3 small saw blades. Kelm inspected each one before admitting that only 2 nails had been lost. Hob drove stakes into the bank for a temporary ferry. Brock organized night watches because the river was still rising. Dren, 19 now and leaner than during winter, limped between work groups with his blue wool cap pulled low over sandy curls. He carried messages, measured rope, and refused to sit when Oren told him his old knee had swollen. Oren's cloudy left eye narrowed at the river. His 2 short gray braids hung over a moss-green cloak that smelled of bitter bark. He said the rain would ease by morning, but snowmelt from the upper valley would keep the water high for another week. Near sunset, the village council met in the common hall. White Mane's enormous hide covered the northern wall. 3 keys to the winter store hung from 3 different belts. Prices for flour, salt, and smoked meat remained written on the board beside the door. The new council had no grand table. 6 elected household speakers sat on benches with Mira's ledger open between them. Anyone could stand along the walls and listen. Hob gave his estimate. Salvaged iron from the old bridge would cover braces for a footpath, but a wagon bridge required at least 12 new straps, 2 chains, hinge plates for a lifting section, and more long spikes than the village smith could make from scrap. The materials and transport would cost between 24 and 28 silver crowns. The common reserve held 6 silver crowns, 14 copper bits, winter hides not yet sold, and food that could not safely be turned into bridge money. The room grew quiet. Male Vero asked permission to speak. Male kept his face composed as he placed 1 brass weight on the open page of Mira's ledger. The Northern Fur Company, he said, could provide every iron fitting, both chains, 12 sacks of seed grain, and 2 southern bridge workers within 10 days. Mira looked at the weight instead of touching it. Taren watched Male's black-gloved fingers. A man who arrived with exactly what desperate people needed rarely gave it away. Male's contract required 42 pages of close writing and only 1 signature from the village council. He presented it the next morning in the common hall, while rain tapped the shutters. 2 assistants unrolled the document across 3 tables. Colored cords marked sections for transport, materials, hunting access, and repayment. The contract looked orderly enough to reassure anyone who had once dealt with Vardek's private ledgers. Mira began at the first line and read every one. The Northern Fur Company valued its immediate contribution at 26 silver crowns. 12 crowns covered iron and chain. 4 covered seed grain. 3 covered tools and salt. The remaining 7 were listed as transport, skilled labor, administrative risk, and protection of trade. In exchange, the company would receive first purchase rights over every marketable hide taken within the old Rime Hollow hunting bounds for 2 full years. Prices were fixed in advance. A winter fox would bring 12 copper bits. A wolf hide would bring 15. Marten and sable would bring 8. Large hides would be graded by a company factor. 20 copper bits still made 1 silver crown. Mira asked Kelm what he had paid for good fox pelts during the previous winter. Kelm said 18 to 22 copper, depending on the coat and how insulting he felt that morning. Several people laughed. Mail did not. The contract also required a minimum of 90 graded pelts each year. Any shortfall would be valued at the company's expected southern resale price, not the low purchase price, and added to the village debt. 1/10 interest would be added at the end of each winter. If the debt exceeded 30 silver crowns, the company could establish a permanent warehouse at the bridge and appoint its own factor to supervise hunting shares. Mail explained that minimum delivery protected the company from building a road into an empty market. Mira placed 3 wooden counting beads on the table. Then she asked Zelda's eldest daughter, who now shared the village books, to copy the prices onto the public board. At 90 pelts a year, even a cautious average market value of 15 copper meant the hides could sell for 67 silver crowns and 10 copper. Under Mail's listed prices, the village would receive perhaps 40 silver crowns. Across 2 years, the difference alone could reach 50 silver crowns or more. A weak winter would add debt on top of that. The company was not charging 26 silver for a bridge. It was buying the right to decide what the valley's work was worth. Mail rolled the brass weight between his fingers. He said Mira's average assumed every pelt found a willing buyer, every trader arrived on time, and every road remained open. His company accepted risk that individual hunters could not. Mira agreed. Then she pointed to the 7 silver crowns charged for transport and risk before the first wagon moved. The room shifted around that answer. People leaned closer to the boards. Not everyone opposed the offer. A farmer named Jory had lost most of his seed rye when the first sack burst beneath the bridge. His wife needed a new iron hoe before planting. Another household had broken its only plow point. The village could build with local wood, but fields could not wait for a market that might fail. A gray-haired shepherd said 26 silver was expensive, yet a missing bridge could cost more by autumn. Taren listened from the wall, with Iva asleep against his shoulder. The child had discovered the silver grain in his bow, and kept reaching toward it whenever he moved. He held the weapon beyond her fingers. When the council asked his view, he gave the practical answer first. The upper forest carried summer marten, ridge cats, and old boars whose hides and tusks could sell well. With Brock and Dren guarding the lower routes, Taren could spend several weeks taking high-value quarry. His own household had enough food. He offered to put every coin from those hunts into the bridge. Mira turned from the ledger, placed both palms on the page, and held his gaze. The refusal was already settled. She said the bridge served 58 households, 3 traders, and every farm south of the river. If Taren paid for it with his body and his bow, people would thank him, use the bridge, and wait for him to solve the next common need. Rime Hollow had already lived under a system that depended on one man's permission. Replacing Vardek's store keys with Taren's hunting skill would change the person, not the weakness. Taren considered the room. Several villagers looked embarrassed because they had already imagined accepting his offer. Mira proposed 10 days. Hob could build a temporary ferry from the recovered wagon bed and 2 black pine rafts. Households could finish a light footbridge. During those 10 days, the village would prepare a public market for hides, leather, smoked goods, hornwork, and herbs. Kelm would bring independent buyers if the village paid a commission, openly recorded in the ledger. Kelm objected to the word paid, as though it were a personal insult. He then named his commission. Mira reduced it by 1/3. They settled between the 2 numbers. Mail listened without interruption. When the council voted to delay the company contract for 10 days, he gathered the colored cords and said his offer would remain open. He established his camp on the southern bank before noon. 3 company wagons stood beneath dark green canvas. 12 workers raised a cook tent, a tool shelter, and a locked records wagon. Their iron traps were packed in straw. Their crossbows rested in oiled cases. The camp looked temporary, yet every rope was measured for a long stay. Mail did not pressure the council again that day. Instead, he spoke to individuals. He offered Jory 2 silver crowns in seed and tools against 10 prime winter pelts. He gave a widow named Marin 1 silver crown in cloth, salt, and a new spade against 6 pelts. 3 other households accepted smaller advances. Each contract stated that the family's obligation remained private, even if the village rejected the larger agreement. The people who signed were not fools. Seeds had to enter the ground within days. A broken plow could ruin a whole field. Mail offered useful things at the exact moment delay became expensive. By sunset, 5 families had received goods with a fair delivered value of 8 silver crowns and 10 copper bits. Mail's higher contract valuations placed the amount written beside their marks above 10 crowns before any future penalties. Mira recorded the names only after each family agreed. She did not shame them. She also wrote the real market value of every item beside Mail's stated value. A hoe that cost 12 copper in the south appeared as 17 in his advance. Salt worth 4 copper a pound appeared as 6. Mail watched her write. "You make people suspicious of rescue," he said. Mira tied the ledger closed. "Rescue ends when the person is safe. Your price begins there." He turned the brass weight once between his fingers and left. That evening, Taren and Mira ate near the open window. Spring air smelled of wet soil and wood smoke. Iva sat propped against a folded blanket, grabbing at a carved spoon Dren had made after finally learning to square a cradle rail. Taren told Mira that Mail would not wait quietly for 10 days. She agreed. A company did not move 3 wagons, 12 workers, and iron traps into a valley to sell 2 hoes. Taren looked toward the forest beyond their repaired yard. Snow remained only in shaded hollows. Hares had begun using the green edges beside the pines. Deer tracks crossed the eastern slope. Farther north, old migration routes were opening after years beneath White Mane's rule. More animals meant more food and trade. It also meant the valley had become valuable before its people had learned how to protect value together. The next morning, Zelda's eldest boy found a goat pen torn open. The tracks behind it belonged to something low, broad, and angry. The animal had entered 3 yards before sunrise. It killed no goats. It tore open hutches, scattered hens, and bit through a wooden feed chest. At Jory's farm, it drove a young dog beneath a cart, then abandoned the chase to attack the iron rim of a rain barrel. That behavior told Taren more than the tracks. A healthy black-backed wolverine avoided crowded homes when easier food existed along thawing streams. This one moved as though every object had offended it. Blood marked only the right footprint. The stride shortened whenever it climbed. Orin knelt beside the barrel in his moss-green cloak. He touched a dark smear on the iron rim and smelled his fingers. The blood carried rust and old infection. The beast had been hurt for several days. Taren followed the trail east with Brock and Dren. The ground changed every few steps. Soft mud held clean 5-toed prints. Pine needles hid them. Meltwater carried scent downhill. The wolverine had doubled back twice, crawled beneath a woodpile, and watched the searchers from less than 20 paces away. Brock carried his boar spear. Dren carried a light bow and 6 arrows. Taren told both men to stay behind him once the trail entered the ravine. Brock glanced at the black bow. "You say that more often now. You listen more often now." Brock scratched his rust-colored beard and accepted the point. The trail crossed the eastern boundary stones and descended into a narrow wash cut by spring water. Alder roots formed dark tunnels along both banks. The stream itself ran no deeper than Taren's ankle, but rain had polished the stones and filled every hollow with moving reflections. He found the trap under a root shelf. 2 steel jaws lay open in the mud. One tooth carried hair and a strip of skin. The chain had been torn from its stake. On the flat hinge plate, beneath scratches from stone, a stamped pine cone enclosed the letters NFC, Northern Fur Company. Dren crouched beside it. His sandy curls escaped beneath the blue cap. He pointed to a serial mark near the spring. The trap had not been placed on a marked company line. The nearest private contract boundary lay more than a mile south, near the road. Someone had set it inside common forest before the council decided anything. A stone clicked behind him. Taren turned as the wolverine came from beneath the opposite bank. It was larger than the winter martens he had hunted, with black-brown fur and a pale stripe along each side. A broken chain dragged from its right foreleg. Swelling had thickened the limb above the trap ring. Foam clung to its lips, not from madness, but from pain and exhaustion. Dren raised his bow. The animal disappeared into alder roots before he could release. Taren heard claws strike wet wood to his left. He moved sideways and drew. A dark body crossed a gap between roots. His arrow passed through fur along the shoulder and struck mud. The shot would have ended a fox. The wolverine twisted in the air, landed against the bank, and climbed almost vertically through exposed roots. The broken chain caught, snapped free, and swung toward Taren's face. He ducked. The iron ring struck the upper limb of the bow. Silver grain flashed beneath mud, but the wood held. Brock thrust the spear into the root opening. The wolverine bit the shaft, pulled with its whole body, and dragged him one step forward. "Let go," Taren said. Brock released before the animal could use the spear as a bridge. The shaft vanished into the root tunnel. The wolverine escaped upstream. Dren started after it. Taren caught his coat. The ravine narrowed ahead. Water entered through a split in the western bank and passed beneath two fallen black pines. The animal knew every hollow. Chasing directly would give it the next attack. Taren retrieved his arrow and studied the blood drops. The wounded paw landed more heavily after the climb. The wolverine would seek dry ground, then circle toward the goat pens again, because pain had made easy food necessary. He sent Brock and Dren back along the upper rim. They would block the two shallow exits with smoke, not fire. Taren remained in the stream and moved slowly uphill. The ravine turned twice. He kept the bow half drawn whenever roots closed around him. Water soaked through his boots. Alder branches touched his shoulders. The sound of the stream hid movement until it happened within reach. The attack came from above. The wolverine dropped from a leaning trunk. Taren saw the pale side stripe and moved his head before the jaws closed. Claws raked the shoulder of his coat and opened 3 burning lines across the skin beneath. He drove the bow grip against the animal's chest. The impact turned it aside, but the wolverine caught his sleeve and pulled him into the stream. Cold water struck his ribs. He rolled before the animal reached his face. One forearm blocked its throat. The injured paw hammered against his chest, while the healthy claws cut the leather bracer. Taren could have used full strength and crushed the body against stone. The angle would also drive the broken trap ring deeper into the swollen leg, twisting the animal unpredictably near his throat. He planted both boots against the bank and pushed. The wolverine flew one body length, struck the water, and vanished under the lower fallen tree. Taren rose with blood running inside his sleeve. Smoke drifted above the ravine. Brock and Dren had reached their positions. The wolverine had 3 choices. It could climb into smoke, retreat toward the deeper forest with an injured paw, or pass between the 2 fallen trunks where the stream narrowed. Taren moved to the downstream side of that gap. He placed his lost arrow across the stones where the iron point would catch light. Then he climbed onto the lower trunk, braced one knee against wet bark, and waited with a fresh shaft set loosely to the string. Minutes passed. A raven called beyond the rim. Smoke thickened, then thinned, as Brock adjusted the damp moss. Water slid around Taren's boots. The cuts in his shoulder began to pulse. The wolverine appeared behind him in the reflection of the arrowhead. It had not chosen any of the visible exits. It had crawled beneath the stream bank and entered through a hollow root, almost under his position. His first instinct aimed at the chest. The broken chain swung across that line. He changed targets during the draw and released at the base of the neck. The arrow struck, but the wet trunk shifted beneath him. The shaft entered at a shallow angle. The wolverine hit his legs and knocked him from the log. Both fell between the 2 trunks. The animal's teeth closed around the lower limb of the bow. Taren kept hold of the grip. Water pushed against his back. The wolverine shook its head, trying to tear the weapon away, while the chain wrapped once around the upper trunk. For a moment, the injury that had tortured the animal also trapped it. Taren did not waste the moment. He pulled the bow sideways, drawing the wolverine's head against the chain, then brought his knee beneath the body. He caught the broken ring with his left hand and forced the injured leg away from his throat. The iron edge cut his palm. His right hand found the knife at his belt. One controlled thrust entered beneath the jaw and reached the spine. The wolverine convulsed once. Taren held until the body went still, then lowered it into the shallow water. Brock reached the ravine floor first. Dren came behind him with an arrow ready. Taren sat against the trunk and opened his left hand. The cut crossed the old blue cloth scar left from Whitemane's hunt, though it was shallower. Warmth entered his fingers. Quarry claimed, black-backed wolverine. Grip settles into the hunter. Rain's steadiness settles into the bow. The change moved through the tendons of his hands and forearms. It felt like every small joint had found a firmer place. The black bow stopped sliding against his wet palm. Water beaded along the string and fell without changing its tension. Taren tested his grip on the trunk. His fingers closed around slick bark as securely as dry rope. Brock looked at the dead animal, the buried arrow, and the blood on Taren's sleeve. You could have asked me to crawl into the hole. It had standards. Dren laughed hard enough to lose his footing in the stream. They carried the wolverine back on a pole, along with the broken trap and chain. Orin cut away the infected foreleg, saved the clean fat for salve, and set the hide aside for wet weather gloves. The remaining meat became scent bait for registered traps rather than food. Orin then cleaned Taren's cuts, while Mira removed the damaged sleeve from his gray coat and inspected the steel jaws before she began sewing. Its springs were even, its teeth filed, its chain links welded instead of bent. A village smith could repair such a tool, but would rarely make one from raw iron. Mail examined it that afternoon in front of the council. He acknowledged the company stamp. He also pointed out that the stake and setting wedge were missing. Anyone could have taken Trap 19 from a wagon and placed it in the forest. Neris Vale stood behind him. She was shorter than Taren, compact through the shoulders, with dark indigo hair cut to her chin and one narrow braid behind her right ear. Moss green eyes followed the serial mark. A charcoal leather vest covered a gray-brown shirt, and a red-brown scarf was tied close at her throat. She said Trap 19 had been issued 2 days earlier to a crew checking the eastern road. Mail looked at her. Neris added that the crew leader had reported it lost. Before or after the council refused hunting access? Mira asked. Neris answered after. The hull changed around the single word. Mail closed the trap with one gloved hand. He promised to investigate the crew. He also warned that spring thieves often stole company iron because villagers knew merchants would be blamed. Taren placed the severed chain beside the jaws. Investigate quickly. The next trap may hold a child instead of a wolverine. Mail met his eyes. The brass weight moved once between his fingers. Outside the hall, workers were already driving stakes for Hobbs Ferry. Across the square, 5 families planted seed bought with company advances. The trap had proved that Mail's people were using the forest before they had permission. It had not made the company unnecessary. Hobb launched the ferry on the 3rd morning after the bridge fell. It consisted of the recovered wagon bed fixed across 2 black pine rafts, with side rails cut from the old bridge. A rope ran between posts on both banks. 2 people could pull the platform across by hand, though Hobb warned that anyone carrying more than 6 grain sacks would finish the trip underwater. The footbridge took 2 more days. It stood upstream where the river narrowed between stone shoulders. Villagers laid paired logs, pinned them with salvage spikes, and added a rope rail. The crossing swayed beneath every step, but it allowed farmers to reach southern fields and let Kelm's messengers use the road. The work kept people moving across the river, while the iron shortage remained. At the same time, Hob put a smaller crew on the abandoned mill spillway south of the village. Silt and willow roots had choked the old stone channel, but its curve still led around the 6 lowest houses. The near gate could be rebuilt from shore. The far lifting bar stood across the side channel, beyond reach whenever floodwater covered the maintenance path. Hob asked Taren whether an arrow could carry a cord through wet oak at 60 paces. Taren told him to make the shaft first. Mira used that time carefully. She divided the common hall into 4 work areas. Zelda and 3 other women grated hides beneath the white mane pelt. Orin inspected herbs and rendered fat near the hearth. Hob displayed horn buttons, bone handles, ash tool shafts, and small boxes with tight-fitted lids. The smokehouse crew prepared meat in measured packets so traders could compare equal weights. Nothing appeared by magic because a market had been announced. Fox hides had to be cleaned again, where winter fat had dried. Rabbit skins were too small to sell alone, so Mira arranged them by color and quality into matched bundles. Leather needed scraping, soaking, stretching, and smoke. Bone handles split if Hob drilled them too quickly. Salt cakes from the bitter spring crumbled until Zelda mixed the brine with cleaner mineral water and dried it in shallow clay trays. Taren helped where his hands were useful and left when they were not. He could skin a boar cleanly. He could not persuade 6 women that a slightly crooked horn clasp still closed well enough. Mira removed him from grading after he placed 3 different qualities in one basket. Instead, he took Dren and 4 younger hunters into the eastern woods. The forest floor had turned green beneath the black pines. Ferns opened beside meltwater channels. Birds returned to branches that had held only snow through winter. Fresh life made tracks harder to read because every patch of soil carried movement. Taren taught them to look beyond single prints. A doe with a nursing fawn took shorter feeding loops and returned repeatedly to the same sheltered hollow. A hair trail with prints of 2 sizes meant a mother and young. Scraped bark at shoulder height marked a mature buck, but the direction of broken twigs showed whether it had remained nearby. They would take old males, injured animals, and small game away from active nesting ground. They would leave females with young. Every household could still hunt for food, but market hunters would record species, sex, and location at the common hall. One boy asked why they needed rules when the forest held more animals than anyone had seen in years. Taren pointed to a meadow where grass rose in bright strips around old snow. Deer had cropped one side close. The other side remained untouched, because white mane had once used the northern ridge above it. The saber cat's death had opened the route. If every hunter took the first easy animal, the route would empty again for a different reason. Dren added that empty trails made poor tracking practice. He said it as though personal inconvenience were the strongest law of nature. The younger hunters remembered it. Brock and Dren spent the afternoons restoring boundary stones. The old marks followed ridges, streams, and a line of split black pines north of the village. Vardek's lodge had kept no reliable map, because uncertainty strengthened his authority. Dren now sketched each position on hide parchment, while Brock drove painted stakes where floods had buried the stones. On the 5th day, they found a stake already moved. The red mark on its base still matched the hollow where it had stood. Fresh mud covered the lower half. Wagon tracks continued north beyond it. Brock wanted to follow at once. Dren reminded him that Taren had asked for the whole boundary line first. Brock stared at the younger man until Dren's hand moved toward his bow. Then Brock grunted and carried the stake back to its original hollow. That evening, Kelm returned with news. He had found 2 independent buyers willing to attend the market. One bought leather for bootmakers in 3 southern towns. The other supplied army outposts and wanted smoked meat, fat, bowstrings, and waterproof stitching wax. A third buyer had refused after receiving a letter from the Northern Fur Company. The letter described Rime Hollow's road as unsafe, its council as temporary, and its hunting claims as disputed. Kelm slapped the folded paper onto Mira's table. "Mail writes beautifully," he said. His lies arrive wearing polished shoes. Mira read the letter twice. She did not ask Kelm to hide it. She pinned it beside the price board so every household could understand why one buyer had withdrawn. The market fund remained modest. Each stall paid 2 copper bits, except households that contributed 2 full days to bridge work. Kelm would receive 1 copper for every full silver crown traded through buyers he brought, with the commission written publicly. The common smokehouse charged the same posted fee to residents and outsiders. Hobbs set a future bridge toll of 1 copper for a light foreign wagon and 2 for a heavy one. But the toll would begin only after a wagon bridge existed. 5 families under company contracts watched these preparations with mixed expressions. Jory worked on the ferry in the mornings and used Mail's new hoe in the afternoons. The tool was real. His rye field was real. So was the promise of 10 prime pelts at 12 copper each, whether foxes crossed his snares or not. Marin brought 2 bundles of rabbit skin to Mira, then pulled them back when she remembered that her contract gave the company first choice over every marketable hide from her household. Mira did not tell her to break the agreement. She wrote the bundle's likely open price on a small wooden tag and handed it over. Marin carried both skins and tag back to her house. The company camp grew while the village worked. Neris led crews along the southern road and returned each evening with maps. Iron traps hung from pack frames. Mail's assistants visited farms with wax tablets and ready contracts. Company cooks bought eggs and milk at fair prices, which made their presence harder to dismiss as simple harm. On the 7th day, Mail attended the council again. He reduced the contract term from 2 years to 18 months and removed 1 silver crown of administrative cost. The minimum pelt quota remained. The warehouse clause remained. The fixed prices rose by 1 copper each. Several council speakers looked toward Mira. She said the offer had improved. It was still designed to make a bad hunting year belong to Rime Hollow and a good hunting year belong to the company. Mail replied that her market had not sold a single item yet. "That is why we are working," Mira said. He looked across the hall at stretched hides, drying salt cakes, carved handles, and posted weights. Work does not guarantee buyers. Neither does a signature guarantee game. The council kept its original deadline. After Mail left, Taren found Mira rubbing the base of her thumb. Ink had stained the side of her hand. Eva slept in a basket lined with rabbit fur beside the ledger table. Taren placed a cup of hot nettle tea near Mira and asked how much the market needed to earn. She showed him the figures. The common reserve could spend 4 silver crowns without weakening emergency food stores. Households had pledged labor worth another 3. Salvaged bridge iron saved perhaps 2 crowns. The village still needed 15 to 19 silver crowns in material or trade credit for the permanent bridge. The first market's purpose was to prove that several buyers would compete and accept part of the price in iron, salt, grain, and tools. Taren studied the columns. Mira covered one with her hand before he could suggest another personal hunt. "I was going to ask how much rope Hob needs." She moved her hand. 300 feet. That seems excessive. He says rivers respect waste. Outside, Hobbs shouted at someone for cutting a line 6 inches too short. Mira's mouth curved. Taren could now see the shape of a solution built from trade, shared labor, and several independent buyers. That afternoon, Hob tested the first cord-carrying shaft against a soaked oak beam. The head struck true, but the metal eye sat too far forward and pulled the arrow sideways before it buried. Taren marked a new position behind the fletching. Hob rebuilt the shaft and hung it beneath the bridge shelter, with the waxed cord coiled beside it. Then Brock entered with a mud-covered boundary stake under one arm. A fresh company mark had been carved over the village red. Taren left for the upper valley before sunrise the next day. Brock carried a heavy spear and enough rope to pull a pony from mud. Dren carried the boundary map inside an oiled leather tube. Taren carried the black bow, 8 hunting arrows, 2 heavy shafts, and a coil of rescue line. Mira added 3 charcoal sticks to Dren's pack and made him repeat the positions he needed to record. Iva sat against her shoulder beneath the dark blue shawl and pulled at the end of Mira's copper braid. Taren touched 2 fingers to the child's pale forelock before leaving. The lower trail climbed through black pine forest in a broad northern loop for half a day. The river cut much more directly toward Rime Hollow, but cliffs and flooded side channels made its bank route impassable on foot. Spring had changed every familiar distance. Snow that once formed bridges over gullies had vanished, exposing loose rock and fast water. Fallen trunks blocked the old sled route. Sunlight reached the ground in white columns, then disappeared behind clouds moving from the west. They found 6 displaced boundary stakes before noon. Each had been carried between 20 and 60 paces north. The company marks were cut neatly. Wagon tracks passed through the false line toward Redgrass Basin. Dren recorded the original stone hollows, tree scars, and distance from the stream. He no longer asked Taren to confirm every mark. When 2 clues disagreed, he walked the ridge until he found the old blazed pine and corrected his own map. You draw slowly. You think slowly. We use what we have. Brock laughed loud enough to startle a grouse from the brush. Near evening, the forest thinned into steep granite country. Red grass from the previous summer lay flattened beneath new green shoots, giving the basin its name. Cliffs rose in broken steps around a narrow valley floor. Far above, white water fell from a snow shelf and vanished into mist. Taren saw the wire before the animal. A length of braided iron crossed the trail at knee height. It had once formed a loop around a stone outcrop. Now it dragged along the cliff face, striking sparks whenever tension pulled it over rock. The stone ram stood on a shelf, 50 paces above. It was an old male, with gray-brown wool, a white muzzle, and horns curled thick around both ears. The wire loop had tightened behind its front legs. A torn length trailed from the knot and scraped the cliff. Blood darkened one side, though the animal still carried its weight evenly. Dren moved toward the lower end of the wire. Taren stopped him. The ram watched them with horizontal black pupils. Its breathing came fast. Every time the loose wire touched rock, it flinched and shifted uphill. Brock said they could cut the cable from below. Taren examined the slope. The wire passed through a crack, around a stone horn, and up to the animal. Cutting the lower end would free 30 feet of weighted cable. It could whip across the shelf or pull the ram off balance. They needed to shorten the line first. Dren volunteered to climb to a small ledge beneath the stone horn and secure the cable with rope. His old knee gave him trouble on long descents, but he had become light and careful on rock. Taren tied the rescue line around Dren's waist and anchored it around his own hips. Brock climbed behind with the spear strapped across his back. The route crossed 3 narrow shelves. Loose gravel slid beneath their boots. The ram moved higher each time they approached. At the second shelf, the cable caught between 2 rocks and pulled taut. Dren reached for it. The ram charged downhill. It crossed the upper shelf in 3 bounds, horns low. The wire tore free from the crack and snapped across the slope. Dren threw himself flat. The cable struck the rock above his shoulders, showering sparks. Taren planted both feet and hauled the rescue line. Dren stopped with one leg over the edge. Brock stepped between him and the ram. The old male hit the spear shaft broadside. Brock had braced the butt against stone, yet the impact lifted him and drove him backward. The shaft split. One horn caught his leather shoulder guard and spun him onto the lower shelf. The ram changed direction before Taren could draw. It climbed a near vertical gully formed by a seam in the cliff. Its hooves found holds no human foot could use. The loose cable followed, striking stone. At the top, the animal turned and prepared to descend again. Taren could not use a normal stance. The shelf beneath him was 1 boot wide. Drawing the black bow fully would shift his center beyond the edge. He lowered his body, wrapped the rescue line once around his left forearm, and set a heavy arrow. The ram came down. Taren aimed into the chest. Wind rose through the gully at the moment of release. The shaft moved a handspan and struck the outer shoulder instead of the heart. Thick muscle and wool turned the point. The arrow cut along the ribs and flew away. The impact did not stop the animal. Taren dropped beneath the horns. One curled tip passed over his silver forelock. The ram's shoulder struck him and crushed him against the cliff. Bare vitality kept the ribs from breaking, but air left his lungs. The animal continued downhill toward Dren, Dren had regained the shelf. He drew his light bow from one knee and released into the stone beside the ram's face. The crack of iron on granite turned the animal half a step. Brock seized the broken cable with both hands and pulled. The loop tightened across the ram's chest. For 2 breaths, animal and man held opposite ends of the slope. Brock's boots slid. The ram lowered its head and dragged him forward. Taren forced air back into his chest and climbed. He did not chase the animal's body. He followed the cable. The wire passed around a stone horn above the shelf, creating a crude change of direction. If he could reach that point, Brock's pull would lift the loop instead of tightening it sideways. Taren climbed the vertical seam the ram had used. Human fingers found fewer holds than hooves. He drove the tip of his knife into a crack, pulled, and placed one boot on a ledge no wider than 2 fingers. Below him, Brock lost another pace. Dren moved to help. The ram lunged, dragging cable across Dren's path. He jumped over it, landed badly, and his weakened knee folded. The rescue rope snapped tight around his waist. Taren took the weight through his hips while hanging from the knife. Stone broke beneath his right foot. For one breath, both men hung from the same line. Taren's winter strength held, but the angle pulled the knife from the crack grain by grain. He looked up and saw the cable rubbing over the stone horn within reach. He swung once, caught the wire with his left hand, and used it to pull himself onto the upper shelf. Then he wrapped the rescue line around the stone horn and hauled Dren back to a foothold. Brock shouted that the ram was turning. Taren cut the wire on the far side of the horn. The free end dropped. Brock's pull lifted the loop away from the ram's forelegs. The old male stumbled, surprised by the sudden release, then spun uphill. With the wire cut free, the ram chose its own path again. It also no longer protected the men from a direct charge. Taren set his second heavy arrow. The ram climbed the gully again. He watched its rhythm. 2 short bounds, 1 long, a pause when the injured shoulder took weight. The animal reached the upper lip and turned broadside for less than a second. Taren was below it and to the left. The shot angle rose steeply through the ribs. He placed his left foot against the cliff, leaned outward over the rescue line. The black bow's silver grain brightened in the open light. The string touched the corner of his mouth. Taren released upward. The heavy arrow entered behind the near foreleg and drove through the chest at an angle. The ram completed 1 bound, struck the shelf with both front hooves, and slid past Taren. Brock and Dren flattened against the rock as the body came to rest against a lower outcrop. The broken cable rattled after it. Quarry claimed. Stone ram leader. Sure footing settles in the hunter. Steep flight settles in the bow. Warmth moved through Taren's ankles, knees, and hips. The narrow shelf stopped feeling narrow. Every pressure point under his boots became clear. The black bow settled naturally when he raised it toward the cliff or lowered it toward the basin. Dren climbed to him with a fresh tear in one knee of his trousers. Next time I volunteer, refuse. You would argue. Refuse more firmly. Brock sat beside the dead ram and inspected the split remains of his spear. I volunteered for nothing and still lost a weapon. They camped in the basin that night. Oren had taught them to use every animal. They dressed the ram, packed the meat beneath cold stones, and saved the hide, horns, sinew, and fat. Taren kept the iron cable and the stamped clamp attached to it. At dawn, they crossed the northern rise. The land beyond opened into a broad green bowl crossed by a clear river. Old red grass rippled between patches of new growth. Tracks covered the mud below, each print wider than Taren's hand. Dung lay fresh beside willow stands. Bark had been stripped from young trees at the height of a man's chest. Ironhorn aurochs had returned to Redgrass Basin. The herd moved near the far slope. More than 60 animals spread across the grass. Dark cows guarded rust-colored calves. Young bulls tested each other in slow pushing contests. Their horns curved outward and forward, black at the tips. One animal stood apart, near the river. Iron Crown was almost as tall at the shoulder as Kelm's pony. His coat was charcoal black with a white stripe down the face. The left horn had broken a third of the way from the tip. The right horn remained long and nearly black. Pale scars crossed his chest. A steel harpoon protruded from his left shoulder. A length of chain dragged from it through the grass. Taren raised the far-seeing lens Kelm had traded him after winter. The flesh around the harpoon was swollen. The chain had broken recently. Iron Crown guarded the herd from downstream, placing his own body between the animals and a line of new fences. Those fences should not have existed. Heavy posts crossed the basin in 3 narrowing arcs. Wagon tracks cut along them. A timber holding pen stood near the river, large enough for dozens of animals. On the western bank, workers were building a short guide barrier from logs and chain across an upper side channel. Dren opened the map tube. Every structure lay north of the restored village boundary. Brock looked at the black bow. Now can I use the simple method? Taren watched Iron Crown tear grass with one hard pull. The chain dragged behind the bull and struck a stone. The animal lifted its head at the sound. Not yet, Taren said. Mail listened to the report inside his records wagon. The wagon walls were lined with narrow drawers, rolled maps, and ledgers held in leather straps. A small iron stove warmed the space, despite mild weather. No object had been left where a sudden road jolt could move it. Taren placed the numbered Wolverine trap, the ram cable, and the overwritten boundary stake on Mail's folding desk. Dren unrolled his map beside them. He had marked the original village stones in red, the moved stakes in black, and the company's new fences in blue. Distances were written along streams and ridges, rather than guessed from memory. Brock stood near the door, because the ceiling forced him to bend his neck. Nerys leaned against the opposite wall, with her arms folded. Her moss-green eyes remained on Dren's map. Mail compared it with a company survey. His map showed the old hunting line farther south. The boundary followed a sentence copied from Vardek's lodge charter. From the split black pine to the northern water, then west beneath the red rise. The language did not name which split black pine or which branch of the river. Vardek had benefited from uncertainty. He said the private contracts allowed his crews to trap and survey wherever household claims reached. 5 Rime Hollow households had signed. Their inherited hunting lines had never been formally measured after the lodge fell. Mira, who had come with 2 council speakers, asked whether those 5 households claimed Redgrass Basin. Mail admitted that they did not. He argued that the basin lay outside any proven village boundary. Dren pointed to 3 generations of blaze marks on the northern trees and an old salt survey stone bearing Rime Hollow's hollow ring symbol. Mail said historical use was not the same as registered ownership. The problem was real enough to make anger dangerous. The nearest magistrate office lay 4 days south by wagon when the bridge worked. The road now ended at a ferry. No official survey had been made since before Taren's father was born. If Brock broke the company camp and drove the workers out, Mail could present the act as armed theft. Southern buyers would avoid a village under investigation. He hated understanding it. He placed both hands on the desk and asked Mail whether a registered boundary made a steel tooth less able to cut a child. Mail did not retreat. No. That is why I suspended trapping east of the road while I investigate Trap 19. Your men built a pen in the north. A holding pen is not a trap. A rope around a ram is not a necklace. Taren touched Brock's forearm once. The huge man straightened and moved away from the desk. Taren told Mail to remove the basin fences until the council and a magistrate could settle the line. The herd had returned through a common migration route. The injured bull and ram proved that company equipment had already affected animals beyond private household claims. Mail rolled the brass weight between his fingers. He offered a compromise. Company workers would stop setting new steel traps east of the southern road. Existing survey fences would remain. No mass drive would begin for 7 days. During that time, Rime Hollow could accept his bridge contract or request an outside survey. The survey would cost 3 silver crowns and take at least 3 weeks. Mira asked why the holding pen was large enough for 60 animals if no drive had been planned. Mail said preparation was not action. Nerys looked toward him. The movement was small, but Taren saw it. Mail then asked everyone except Taren to leave. Taren refused. The factor's pale eyes moved to Mira. The offer concerns his services. Then I can hear him refuse it, Mira said. Mail considered that, then opened a locked drawer. Inside lay 20 silver crowns in 5 neat stacks, and a folded dark green sash bearing the Northern Fur Company pinecone. He offered Taren 6 silver crowns immediately, 2 silver each month, company arrows, legal access to every contracted range, and the title of Chief Valley Hunter. Taren would oversee safety, choose quotas, and keep 1/5 of any exceptional quarry he personally killed. The title would place the Black Bow above every company crew. For several households, 6 silver crowns represented a year's cash. Mail said Rhyme Hollow would gain influence inside the company instead of fighting it from outside. The bridge could be completed without draining the common reserve. Taren's family would be secure even in a poor season. Taren looked at the coin, then at the maps. Would I be allowed to close Redgrass Basin? Mail answered carefully. Taren could recommend closure for safety. Final commercial decisions would remain with the factor responsible for investor property. Would I set pelt prices? No. Prices belonged to the purchasing office. Could I refuse a minimum quota after a weak breeding year? He could submit a report. Taren placed the green sash over the coin stacks. Then you are not offering me the forest. You are offering me a place between your orders and the people who suffer from them. Mail said every authority stood between orders and consequences. Taren left the wagon. Taren left the coin stacks untouched. Silver remained useful, even when its owner was wrong. But the decision belonged to the valley. He walked out of the wagon. Outside, company workers loaded traps onto a rack. Several watched him pass. Neris followed a moment later. She returned Dren's map tube, which one assistant had taken for copying. Dren asked whether the company would honor the 7-day pause. Neris said she would not set another trap before the boundary question was settled. Brock asked about the other crews. Her jaw tightened beneath the red-brown scarf. I said what I control. That answer made Taren trust her more than a broad promise would have. They crossed the ferry at dusk. The platform rode low, beneath 5 people. Hobb shouted from the northern post that Brock counted as 2 and should pay twice once the toll began. Brock promised to test every bridge Hobb built by jumping on it. For a few moments, the river and the argument sounded ordinary. Then, Dren looked back toward the company camp. 2 wagons were already heading north along the western track, away from the suspended eastern traps. Their loads were covered, but the iron chain beneath one canvas rattled over every stone. The first open market began under clear sky. 3 rows of tables filled the square between the common hall and the smokehouse. Hobb had built each one from the same width of board, so no seller received a larger surface by favor. Mira marked the stalls with household signs, posted the weighing rules, and placed 2 sets of iron scales on a central table where everyone could watch them. The company camp opened its own buying table across the river. Mail sent an assistant into the square with a clean price board. His figures were 1 copper higher than the original contract and available immediately in coin. He did not forbid anyone from attending the village market. He only reminded the 5 contracted households that first purchase belonged to the company. Kelm arrived before breakfast with 2 buyers and a complaint about the footbridge. Daris Fen, a leather merchant from the southern boot towns, was a square woman with close-cut gray hair and a measuring cord wound around one wrist. The second buyer, Corin Bale, supplied frontier posts. He wore a faded blue military coat and inspected every smoked meat packet as if it might conceal a weapon. Kelm had also brought 4 empty wagons, 40 pounds of rock salt, 3 coils of rope, nails, tool steel, lamp oil, linen, and 2 small casks of pitch. He intended to sell all of it at a profit. Mira intended to make that profit visible. The first dispute came before the first sale. Daris placed a bundle of 6 winter rabbit skins on the scale and declared them short by half a pound. Selda's eldest daughter checked the public weights, then checked Daris's traveling weight. The merchant's iron piece had been repaired with a lead plug beneath one worn edge and measured heavy. Daris stared at it, rubbed the edge with her thumb, and replaced it without argument. The bundle sold at the village weight. People noticed. The market moved slowly after that. Traders did not buy everything merely because tables looked organized. Darius rejected 3 hides with knife cuts near the belly. Corin refused a batch of meat smoked too quickly at high heat. Oren made one seller reopen a jar of rendered fat because water had collected at the bottom. Every rejection came with a reason, written beside the household mark. By midday, quality improved because people could see what earned a better price. Darius bought the best wolf leather at 1 silver crown and 4 copper per hide. Fox pelts sold between 18 and 21 copper. Matched rabbit bundles brought more than loose skins. Corin paid in mixed coin and iron for 600 pounds of smoked meat, 12 jars of fat, sinew cord, and stitching wax. Hob sold bone-handled awls to Darius, then bought one of them back after she demonstrated that his grip was too smooth for wet hands. He spent an hour cutting cross grooves into the remaining handles and sold them before sunset. The 5 contracted families stood at the edge of the square with goods they could not freely offer. Jory brought 2 fox pelts and an old wolf hide. Mail's assistant graded both foxes as ordinary and offered 12 copper each. Darius had just paid 19 for a pelt of similar quality. Jory argued. The assistant opened the private contract and showed his mark beneath the fixed price. People gathered. Jory's face darkened. He had used the seed rye. The iron hoe was already in his field. Refusing the sale would not return either item. Taren stepped closer, because anger had begun to pull Brock across the square. Mira arrived first. She asked the assistant to weigh the pelts on the public scale. He refused, saying company grades were not measured by weight alone. Mira agreed and asked him to state every flaw aloud, so the same standard could be applied to future deliveries. The assistant found 2 weak guard hairs and a narrow cut near one hind leg. Darius listened, then said neither flaw reduced the pelt below 18 copper in the boot towns. Mail crossed the footbridge during the argument. He did not overrule his assistant. The contract named the price. Jory had accepted it. Jory turned on Mira and the council. He said they had asked hungry fields to wait for a market, while Mail had provided seed when it mattered. Now, everyone expected him to feel grateful for prices he could not use. His anger had a fair target, even when it struck the wrong people. Taren offered to deliver fox pelts against Jory's quota. Mira looked at him across the table. He already knew the answer, yet the sight of Jory gripping a contract with soil under his nails made the offer difficult to withhold. Mira said the common hall could not promise Taren's future hunts every time someone signed a private debt. That would reward the company for issuing more advances and teach every household that another man's labor would absorb the risk. Jory asked whether the village planned to let 5 families sink for making the wrong choice. Mira said no. She proposed a buyout of the original value of the advances after the market closed. The common fund would not pay Mail's added fees or future penalties. Each family would return the principal through bridge labor and a small share of later market sales at open prices. The arrangement required a council vote and the consent of every household that contributed to the fund. Mail said private contracts could not be erased by village preference. Mira answered that debts could be paid. He rolled the brass weight between his fingers. At the value written in the agreement. At the value of what you delivered, with a fair transport charge. If you demand more, we will place every item and southern price on this table before the magistrate. Mail's expression remained composed. His thumb stopped moving over the weight. The market continued around them. By dusk, 31 silver crowns and 8 copper bits in goods and coin had changed hands. Most belonged to individual households. The common fund collected 2 silver crowns and 9 copper from stall fees, smokehouse charges, and its fixed share of common store goods. More valuable than the coin, Kelm and Corin accepted future payment for 8 iron straps, 2 boxes of long spikes, and 6 hinge plates delivered on the next caravan. Darius ordered finished leather for late summer and paid 1/3 in advance. The bridge was not funded. It had become possible. The council met by lantern light while traders packed their wagons. After a long argument, the households approved Mira's debt plan. The common reserve would use 4 silver crowns, the limit Mira had set without weakening emergency food stores. The full market income added 2 silver crowns and 9 copper bits. Kelm agreed to lend the remaining 2 silver crowns and 1 copper bit, with 1 additional copper bit as the total interest, provided repayment came before autumn. He insisted that generosity had no place in bookkeeping. The 5 families signed labor schedules and future sales shares. No one called the arrangement forgiveness. The debt remained, but its price could no longer grow in secret. Mail accepted the settlement of 8 silver crowns and 10 copper bits the next morning. An early repayment paragraph in his own forms defined cash settlement before the first grading date as the delivered value plus ordinary transport. Mira's calculation used the southern value of the goods actually delivered and Kelm's posted caravan rate. It excluded mail's inflated item values, every future penalty, and the private pelt quotas. The 2 fox pelts and old wolf hide Jory had brought to the buying table were returned to him before mail crossed the footbridge. The private pelt quotas ended. 5 households returned to the open market with relief mixed with embarrassment. Mira assigned Jory to the ferry rope beside 2 council speakers who had voted against the buyout. Work made a better beginning than speeches. The larger boundary dispute remained. The council needed someone to inspect company operations, while the outside survey request traveled south. Neris had offered to guide an official observer through the company's marked routes. Taren expected Mail to reject Brock, and expected Brock to reject any order requiring patience. He chose Dren. Dren stared at him. Because I draw slowly? Because you record what you see before deciding what it means. The answer placed more weight on the young hunter than praise would have. Dren accepted. He and Neris left at dawn with a copy of the village map, 2 days of food, signal cord, and written authority from the council to inspect traps, fences, and holding pens. They were expected back before sunset the following day. The next evening, Neris's company horse returned alone. Mud covered the saddle. 1 stirrup had torn away. A strip of Dren's blue wool cap was tied around the reins. Taren left within minutes. Taren treated the returning horse as a rescue signal. Someone had needed it to find the road home. Rain began as Taren crossed the footbridge. Brock followed with rope, an axe, and a spear. Oren remained in the village to prepare for injuries. Hob brought a small pulley block and 2 iron hooks because Dren's blue cloth on the reins meant rescue, not pursuit. The signal had been established during winter travel. Mail met them at the company camp. He said Neris, Dren, and a 6-person survey crew had gone to the upper holding site. 3 workers returned at noon with a damaged wagon and reported a partial collapse. They believed Neris and the others were following on foot. Taren asked where the 3 workers were. Mail said he had sent them south with equipment before the road worsened. You sent the uninjured people away with the wagon. The wagon carried survey records and iron worth 11 silver crowns. Neris knows the basin. Brock took 1 step forward. Taren did not touch him this time. He only said his name. Brock stopped. Mail provided the route and offered 2 workers. Taren refused the men because he did not know their pace or judgment. He took Neris's spare survey map instead. The rain erased ordinary tracks along the road. Taren searched for decisions. At the first fork, the company wagon had turned south. A second set of prints continued north. 1 person favored the left side. Dren's old knee hurt on wet descents, so he planted his right boot harder and shortened the left step. Neris walked beside him. Behind them, 2 people had been dragged or carried. The trail entered ferns above the river. A broken stem pointed downhill. Blood marked the pale wood inside it. Farther on, mud had been scraped from a stone by a boot heel. Someone had tied 3 blades of grass around a twig. Dren's sign for unstable ground. The holding pen appeared through rain near sunset. It stood on a sloping shelf above a narrow branch of the river. Workers had cut young black pines for walls and anchored them with iron cable. The uphill gate had collapsed inward. 1 support beam lay across the central trench. Water poured beneath it, carrying soil from the foundation. Dren and Neris were under the beam. They stood, shoulder to shoulder, in knee-deep mud, holding one end high enough to keep its full weight from 2 injured workers trapped against the lower wall. Dren's blue cap was missing a strip. Blood ran from his hairline. Neris's face had gone pale, and one arm shook beneath the timber. A third worker crouched behind them, with a broken ankle and both hands pressed to the beam. Dren looked up through rain. Taren examined the structure before answering. The beam supported more than itself. 3 wall posts leaned against its upper side. Cutting it would release the whole corner. Lifting from below would drive the trapped workers deeper into mud. The river branch had already eaten away the nearest anchor point. Hob crawled along the intact wall. He found a standing black pine, 20 paces uphill, and judged it strong enough for the pulley. Taren set a heavy arrow with a guide cord. The shot had to pass through a fork in the pine, above the leaning posts, without striking anyone beneath the beam. Rain hid the target and pushed the cord sideways. The black bow remained steady in his wet hand. The Wolverine's gift held string tension unchanged. He released. The arrow crossed the pen, passed through the fork, and buried itself in the uphill bank. Brock pulled Hob's thicker rope through. Hob fixed the pulley block to the standing pine and ran the rope down to an iron hook. The problem was attaching it. The beam lay beyond a section of wall that could collapse under a man's weight. Taren climbed onto the slanted posts. New balance from the stone ram made every angle clear beneath his boots. One post shifted. He transferred his weight before it rolled. Neris told him the lower wall had moved twice in the last hour. "Why did it fall?" he asked. A young ironhorn bull had been driven into the test pen to measure gait strength. The animal hit the uphill barrier. One anchor pulled free because water had softened the trench. Mail order be uninjured crew to save the records wagon before the road closed. Neris and Dren remained when the beam trapped the others. Taren reached the center. He hung one-handed from the guide rope, lowered the hook, and caught the beam near its balance point. His fingers closed around the wet iron with unnatural certainty. The Wolverine gift turned a dangerous hold into a firm one. Tighten. Brock and Hob pulled uphill. The rope straightened. The beam rose half an inch. Mud released beneath the trapped men with a sucking sound. Neris shifted her shoulder. Dren pulled one worker's arm free. Then the standing black pine bent. Its roots had grown shallow over stone. Hob saw the soil lift and shouted for everyone to stop. They could not lower the beam again. One trapped worker had moved his leg beneath it. Taren looked at the leaning wall posts. If the pine failed, the pulley would throw the beam downhill. If they braced the tree, they needed time. He took his knife, cut the guide cord from the heavy arrow, and tied it around his waist. Then, he climbed above the pulley to the tree's uphill side. Brock understood. He carried the spare rope around a boulder farther up the slope. Taren caught the end, wrapped it twice around the pine, and locked it with a rescue knot. The roots lifted another finger's width. Pull now. Brock, Hob, and the uninjured worker hauled. Taren leaned backward on the braceline. The pine bent against his weight. Rain ran into his eyes. His boots slipped across wet soil until stone ram balance found the edge of a buried root. The beam rose. Dren dragged the first worker clear. Neris pulled the second by his coat. The man with the broken ankle crawled after them. One lower post broke. The wall dropped into the trench. Mud and water struck Dren's back. Taren released the braceline and slid down the pine, using the wet trunk like a rope. He landed beside Neris as she lost hold of the beam. The pulley carried most of the weight. Taren caught the timber with both hands and pushed long enough for Dren to clear his trapped boot. Brock cut the rope. The beam crashed into the empty trench. The wall followed. Brown water swallowed the space where 5 people had been standing. They moved the injured to a rock shelter above the pen. Hobbs set the broken ankle. Taren cleaned the head wounds. Neris sat against the wall with her right arm held close to her body. Orin would later call it a torn shoulder, not a break. Dren opened his coat and removed an oilskin packet. Inside lay the company drive map. He had taken it from the survey wagon after the collapse, while the crew argued about saving equipment. The map showed 3 fence arcs through Redgrass Basin, the large holding pen, and a timber barrier across the river branch. Numbers beside the herd route estimated 70 to 80 iron horns. A note in Mail's hand called for completion before the magistrate's expected arrival. Neris confirmed the handwriting. She had not known the final target count until that morning. Company workers had already tried to hold one young bull as a gate test. The animal escaped during the collapse. Taren asked whether Mail had ordered injured people left. Neris answered precisely. Mail had ordered the sound workers to save the wagon and send help from camp. The workers chose to continue south because the road was failing. Mail had not returned after learning that the horse came back alone. The distinction belonged in the record. The trapped workers still carried its cost. They spent the night under the rock shelter. Rain made travel unsafe for the injured. Brock gave his blanket to the worker with the broken ankle and sat awake near the entrance. Dren leaned against the wall with his knee wrapped. Neris held the map on her lap. She had defended the company because contracts, even harsh ones, created known rules. A trapper knew his quota. A buyer knew his cost. A worker knew who paid after injury. Mail had pledged his own company shares to finance the new route and needed a profitable shipment before the end of summer. Failure would cost him his position and leave him owing the southern investors. The pressure explained his haste. It did not transfer the weight of the beam from the injured men. 2 workers had been left beneath that beam while an 11 Silver Crown wagon reached dry ground. Mail will say the crew disobeyed when they failed to return, she said. Taren fed another branch into the fire. Did they? Yes. Will that make the beam lighter? Neris looked toward the sleeping men. At dawn, they built 2 litters and started home by the lower slope. The shortest route crossed the southern edge of Redgrass Basin. Before they reached it, the ground began to tremble. The vibration came through the soles before any animal appeared. Taren raised one hand. The litter team stopped beneath a line of young spruce. Rain had weakened to mist, but water still ran from every branch. Across the basin, company horns sounded twice. A group of ironhorn cows burst from behind the first fence arc. Calves ran between them. 2 young bulls followed with heads high, confused rather than charging. Workers along the upper slope struck hide screens and waved tarred cloth to turn the animals toward the holding pen. The drive map had named 70 animals. This test used perhaps 15. It was enough to make the basin dangerous. The animals reached the second fence and found the gate closed. The lead cow turned. The herd compressed behind her. A calf fell and disappeared beneath dark bodies. Neris swore and tried to rise from the litter pole she had been helping carry. Her injured shoulder failed. Dren saw the same danger. If the animals broke east, they would cross the narrow trail where the injured workers lay. The slope below ended at the river. Taren told Brock to move the litters uphill into the spruce. Dren would guide them along the rock line. Neris remained with the injured. Then a chain struck stone inside the mist. Iron Crown came through the upper fence. The old bull did not jump it. He hit one post with the base of his right horn and tore the entire section from the ground. Charcoal fur shone wet across his shoulders. The white stripe on his face made his lowered head easy to follow. The broken left horn ended in a blunt dark point. The steel harpoon remained in his shoulder. Its chain had been tied to a buried log beyond the fence. When the bull advanced, the log tore from the soil and followed him, knocking workers aside. One company hunter raised a crossbow. Taren's arrow struck the ground before his boot. The man flinched and lost the shot. "You hit that bull here. Every animal runs through the litters," Taren said. The hunter shouted that Mail had ordered the old male taken alive if possible, and tilled if necessary. Iron Crown reached the compressed herd. He placed his body between the cows and the men, then drove both horns beneath the closed gate. Wood split. The gate lifted, but did not open because a chain held its upper corner. The calf beneath the herd kicked once in the mud. Taren ran downhill. He used the narrow top of the first fence as a path, feet landing on wet posts. Stone ram balance carried him over gaps. The black bow stayed in his left hand. A worker swung a hide screen to turn him away. Taren passed before the man understood that he was not part of the herd. He reached the chained gate and drew at the upper fastening. A normal arrow would glance from the angled link. Taren used one of the narrow reinforced heads the village smith had forged for Whitemane on an ash shaft Hob had shaped. He waited until the gate rose under Iron Crown's horns, exposing the pin behind the chain. The arrow struck the wooden pin and split it. The chain fell. Iron Crown threw the gate aside. The lead cows surged through. The fallen calf appeared beneath them, rolled in mud, and regained its feet beside its mother. The opening led north, away from the injured people. Company workers closed from both sides, trying to turn the herd back toward the holding pen. A horn sounded 3 times. Someone released the final fence rope too early. A heavy net dropped across the lead cows. Panic changed direction through the herd like wind through grass. The animals turned east. Taren shot the first net support. The rope broke, but the weighted edge remained tangled around 2 cows. Iron Crown struck it from behind. One weight wrapped around his right horn. The old bull tore the net free and saw Taren on the fence. Pain, smoke, shouting, and the black bow became one target. Iron Crown charged. Taren jumped from the post line. The bull's right horn passed beneath him and shattered the fence. Taren landed on the animal's back for 1 step, boots sliding across wet hair, then pushed away before the harpoon chain swept behind the shoulder. He hit the ground running. The bull turned faster than its size suggested. The broken left horn made the turn uneven, right shoulder driving forward first. Taren reached the riverbank as Iron Crown closed the distance. A willow root formed a low arch above the mud. The harpoon chain had wrapped around it during the turn. The bull hit the end of the chain. Its wounded shoulder jerked backward. Iron Crown bellowed and tore at the root. The sound rolled across the basin. Cows answered from the open gate. Taren had a clean shot. The bull stood broadside at 20 paces. The heart lay behind the front leg. His bow could drive a heavy shaft through the wet hide and deep into the chest. He drew. Then he saw the herd behind Iron Crown. The animals had stopped at the sound of their leader. Calves crowded between cows. Company workers stood along the western side. The injured litter team remained uphill to the east. If the old bull fell where he stood, the herd would either circle him into the workers or turn down the riverbank toward the litters. The open northern path had narrowed because the weighted net dragged across it. A dead bull could become a wall more dangerous than a living one. Taren changed targets. He released at the willow root. The heavy arrow cut through the chain loop and split the rotten wood beneath it. Iron Crown lunged free. The chain still hung from the harpoon, but the buried log and root no longer held him. The bull charged Taren again. Taren ran along the river instead of away from the herd. He struck the black bow against a stone as he moved. The sharp note held Iron Crown's attention. The bank narrowed between water and a line of fence posts. Taren could hear hooves behind him. He reached the final support of the weighted net, set an arrow while running, and shot backward beneath his arm. The net dropped flat. Cows crossed it. The herd began flowing north. Iron Crown's right horn passed close enough to tear the back of Taren's coat. The bull's shoulder struck him sideways. He rolled down the bank and entered the river to his knees. Cold current pushed against him. The old bull stopped at the water edge. The remaining chain swung beneath his chest. Taren raised the bow again. Iron Crown lowered his head. Across the basin, the last cow cleared the open gate. Dren shouted from the spruce that the litters were moving. The danger had changed. Taren could kill the bull now without turning the herd toward helpless people. He found the heartline and began the draw. Iron Crown stepped backward instead of charging. The old animal turned toward the departing herd. Blood and rain ran from the harpoon wound. He climbed the bank, passed through the broken fence, and followed the cows north. Taren let the string down. The company hunters stared from the slope. One shouted that the bounty had just walked away. Taren climbed from the river. Your wounded men did not. Nerys had watched the entire encounter from beneath the spruce. Her face showed pain from the torn shoulder and something harder to name. She said Male had valued an iron-horn bullhide at 8 silver crowns, more if the horns matched. Iron Crown's right horn alone could sell for 2. Taren looked toward the northern grass, where the herd disappeared. Then, he should have taken better care of it. They reached Rime Hollow by late afternoon. Male met the injured workers beside the ferry. He paid Oren's treatment cost and promised each man full wages during recovery. He also listened to the account of Iron Crown without interrupting. That evening, a new notice appeared at the company camp. The Northern Fur Company offered 10 silver crowns to any licensed hunter who killed the black bull called Iron Crown and delivered the hide with the right horn intact. Below the notice, Male added a second line. The company would not employ a hunter who abandoned valuable quarry from fear. No name appeared, and everyone understood the target. Male offered 12 silver crowns for permission to conduct one controlled drive in Redgrass Basin. The number reached the council before sunrise. It would purchase both bridge chains, hinge plates, pitch, and enough long spikes to finish the wagon crossing before midsummer. He offered another 4 silver crowns to be divided among households that provided guides and labor. For a village that had spent winter counting handfuls of barley, 16 silver crowns sounded like abundance. The council meeting filled the common hall and the square outside it. Male stood beneath White Mane's hide with a clean copy of the proposal. He described the Ironhorn herd as newly arrived wealth. Old bulls competed for grass and injured younger animals. A controlled harvest would reduce pressure, provide meat, and prove the valley's value to southern buyers. He proposed taking 20 adult animals, no calves, with Iron Crown counted separately, if the bounty were claimed. Oren asked how the company would choose adult cows from running animals inside fences. Male said Nerys's crews had methods. Nerys stood near the back, with her right arm in a sling. She did not answer for him. Mira had prepared a different set of figures. She placed an ironhorn hide, borrowed from the company camp, across one table. It came from a young bull killed south of the basin the previous year. Darius Fen had examined it before leaving the market and written expected prices for rawhide, finished leather, horn, bone, fat, and smoked meat. One animal used well could produce goods worth between 2 and 4 silver crowns locally, more in distant towns. 20 animals might indeed earn the company a large return. Then, Mira drew the line forward. Ironhorn cows calved slowly. Oren estimated that fewer than half the mature cows would bear a calf in any given year, and not every calf survived its first winter. The herd had only recently returned because White Mane no longer blocked the route. A drive that separated cows, injured calves, and killed breeding animals would reduce future visits for several seasons. A living herd also left value without slaughter. Old animals died in winter. Shed horn tips and broken horn could be collected along the route. Predators followed the migration and restored game patterns farther south. Traders would return for legal summer quotas, leather, guides, food, and bridge use. Hunters could take a small number of old bulls each year at open prices, instead of giving one company a single large season. Mira turned the price board around. The 12 silver crowns bought the village's permission once. The company's likely resale from 20 animals could exceed 60. If the drive damaged the herd, Rime Hollow would carry the loss after the wagons left. Jory asked the question many people held. Can we afford to protect animals when the bridge is still rope and logs? Mira did not pretend the answer was easy. The permanent bridge would be delayed. Heavy wagons might wait another 3 weeks. Some iron had been ordered on credit. A flood or failed market could still hurt them. Then she pointed to Male's contract and the bounty notice. Taking the easy silver would teach every future buyer that urgent repairs were enough to purchase hunting decisions. Taren spoke only after the figures were clear. He described the first encounter with Iron Crown. The bull was dangerous because a harpoon remained in its shoulder and company fences had trapped the herd. Killing it might eventually become necessary. Driving the entire herd into a holding pen was a different act. A farmer asked whether Taren could guarantee the animals would never enter fields or attack people. He could not. He could guarantee that fences, horns, smoke, and wounded leaders would make those risks worse. The debate lasted until afternoon. Households with no direct use for the bridge favored caution more easily. Farmers on the southern side wanted iron now. Hunters saw profit. Mothers remembered frost deer inside the village. Workers who had been left under the collapsed beam opposed the company drive, even though Mail paid their wages. Neris finally stepped forward. She said a selective hunt required patient observation over days. Mail's current pen, fence arcs, and river barrier were built for volume. Once 70 frightened animals moved, no hunter could select 20 cleanly. The proposal used the language of control for an operation designed around panic. Mail's pale eyes remained on her. You are under contract. So are you. The company's safety charter is attached to mine. She placed a copy on Mira's table. The vote passed by 4 household marks. Redgrass Basin closed to mass drives until an outside survey established the boundary. Limited food hunting remained legal south of the old ridge. No fence could block the common migration route. The council authorized confiscation of unmarked or illegally placed mass traps. Taren received temporary authority to enforce those boundaries with 2 witnesses whenever possible. The authority would end after the survey or at midsummer, whichever came first. The outside survey required a 3 silver crown filing payment. Each of Rhyme Hollow's 58 households contributed 1 copper bit from cash or its recorded market share. And the Common Fund supplied the final 2 bits. The sealed request went south that evening. The council also offered Taren a permanent title as Master of the Hunt. He refused. Dren asked why he accepted the work, but not the title. Taren said a temporary problem needed someone responsible. A permanent forest needed rules that survived whoever carried the bow. Mail folded his proposal. He informed the council that the Northern Fur Company did not recognize a closure beyond proven village land. He would await the magistrate's representative before starting any commercial action inside disputed territory. Taren watched the brass weight move between Mail's fingers. The factor had stopped rolling it in a circle. He pressed its sharp edge into the black glove instead. Dren found the first mass trap 2 days later. He and Brock had gone north to inspect the restored line. Near a grove of pale birch, they found a new wagon track crossing the old boundary stones. The track ended at a funnel of rope netting stretched between trees. 3 deer and a young ridge boar were trapped inside. Company workers were loading the boar into a cage. 2 men carried crossbows. 4 others held hooked poles. Another team had pulled 2 boundary stakes from their original hollows and driven them 50 paces south, placing the trap on the company side of the false line. Dren did not confront them alone. He sent Brock's youngest cousin back with a signal whistle, then moved to a rise where he could see the entire funnel. Brock stood beside him, with both hands on a new ash spear. We could settle this before Taren arrives, Brock said. Dren pointed to the crossbows. We could also settle 3 funerals. Brock looked at him, then nodded. The workers continued loading animals. 1 deer had caught a rear leg in the net and kicked until rope cut through hair. The ridge boar struck the cage bars and bent 1 hinge. Taren reached the grove with 4 council witnesses and Neris before the cage was secured. He stepped into the wagon track where everyone could see him. The company crew leader, a thick-necked man named Pell, ordered his crossbowmen forward. He held a copy of the disputed company survey and claimed the trap stood inside company access land. Dren unrolled the boundary map. Brock lifted one of the freshly moved stakes from the wagon. Wet soil still filled the old hollow behind it. Pell said village men might have moved the stake themselves. Neris asked for the trap register. The crew leader refused. He said she was suspended from field duty after abandoning company property at the collapsed pen. One crossbowman raised his weapon toward Brock. Taren drew before the stock reached the man's shoulder. His first arrow struck the crossbow trigger housing. The iron head split the wooden guard and drove the release pin sideways. The string remained locked. The second crossbowman fired. Taren moved half a step. The bolt passed his coat and entered a birch. His next arrow caught the man's cloak near the collar and pinned it to the wagon side. The hunter dropped the weapon and struggled against the cloth. Pell shouted for the others to take Taren at once. No one moved first. Brock could have used the pause to charge. He planted his spear across the road instead, blocking the angry village men behind him. He said, "Witnesses," Brock told them. "You want to help. Keep your hands where the witnesses can see them." Pell drew a long knife and came forward himself. Taren lowered the bow. The crew leader took that for permission. He rushed along the wagon wheel, using the cage to cover his approach. Taren waited until the knife passed the boar bars. Then he stepped inside the swing, caught Pell's wrist, and turned it against the cage frame. The knife fell. Pell drove a shoulder into Taren's chest. Taren gave ground on purpose, pulled the arm across his body, and used the man's weight to place him face down in the mud. One knee held the crew leader's elbow. Taren picked up the knife and cut the company sash from his belt. "You are alive because this is a boundary hearing," he said. "Do not mistake that for weakness." The remaining workers lowered their poles. Maris opened the records box under the wagon bench. She found trap numbers, crew assignments, and a written order to move the southern guideline to the new survey marks. Mail's clerk had signed it. A second order instructed crews to collect all available animals before the expected arrival of Survey Deputy Alwyn in 4 days. Pell said the order referred only to legal company ground. Neris held up the register. The listed coordinates used Dren's old village stones, not the newly moved stakes. Someone had changed the ground to fit the paper. The council witnesses saw every page. Taren ordered the cage opened. The ridge boar burst out first. Brock held the gate with the spear shaft and turned the animal toward clear forest. The trapped deer required slower work. Dren covered their eyes with a cloth, while Neris cut the rope from the injured leg. All three eventually crossed the stream and disappeared among birches. The company equipment went to the common hull as evidence. Pell and his crew kept their personal weapons after the firing strings were removed. Taren did not want Mail later claiming they had been robbed on the road. The workers returned to camp on foot. Mail received them in silence. By evening, he had moved the records wagon and 2 supply carts toward Redgrass Basin. He told the remaining camp that the company would withdraw disputed equipment for inventory. Maris watched the wagons leave from the northern bank. She said the upper route did not lead to any inventory yard. Taren asked where it led. The horn stations. Oren had already warned that a heavy storm would reach the basin by the following afternoon. High clouds had begun forming long gray bars over the western ridge. If Mail meant to complete a drive before Deputy Alwyn arrived, he had little time left. Taren sent 2 runners south with copies of the orders and instructions to meet the deputy on the road. He placed watch teams on the northern trail. Mail did not wait for the next dawn. Before midnight, a company horn sounded from Redgrass Basin. Then another answered farther east. The upper valley glowed with moving fire. Company workers carried shielded torches along the fence arcs, using smoke and light to push the herd without burning the wet grass. Horn stations called from 3 ridges. Deep notes moved the iron horns toward the southern narrowing, where the holding pen and the first fence gates waited. Farther downstream, a second company worksite blocked the lower side channel above Rime Hollow. Mail had begun the drive 6 hours before sunrise. Taren, Brock, Dren, Neris, and 7 village volunteers reached the northern rise while darkness still filled the basin floor. Oren had remained in Rime Hollow after giving them a final warning. The storm would not announce itself with gentle rain. Warm valley air and snow cold from the heights would meet over the river by afternoon. Below, the herd had already split. Cows and calves pressed against the eastern fence. Young bulls ran along the western arc, turning whenever torches appeared. Iron Crown moved between both groups, the harpoon chain striking his foreleg with every stride. The company had completed a second river boom below the basin. Black pine logs were chained across the lower side channel, 300 paces above the unfinished village bridge. 2 lengths of lighter company haul chain held the barrier. The river ran almost straight from that point to Rime Hollow, while the land trail reached it only after looping around the eastern cliffs. The boom narrowed the herd's final natural crossing and directed animals toward a lower holding gate. Hobbs-marked bridge timbers lay stacked nearby. Company workers had taken them from the South Bank workyard and used them in the drive without council permission. Nerys said the boom would collect flood debris if the storm arrived. Taren divided the village group. Dren took 3 people along the old deer trail to open the eastern fence from outside. Brock and 4 volunteers would take the ridge cutoff to the lower holding gate above Rime Hollow and prevent it from closing on the herd. Nerys led Taren toward the horn stations because she knew the company's signals. They descended through wet grass. A horn changed from 2 short notes to 1 long call. Workers on the west released a tarred screen. The young bulls turned east, directly into the cows. The herd compressed. Iron Crown struck the ground with 1 forehoof and charged the nearest screen. Men dropped it and ran. The bull tore through cloth, rope, and 2 supporting poles. The first company worker fell beneath a pole. Taren reached him as a young bull came along the fence. He shot the upper rope above the animal. The screen collapsed across its horns and turned its head. Nerys dragged the worker clear by his belt. They did not have time to carry him downhill. Taren placed him behind a stone trough and marked the position with a red strip from Nerys' scarf. At the eastern line, Dren cut the gate rope. The gate did not open. Company workers had added a second chain after the council vote. Dren climbed the post, while cows struck the fence below. 1 volunteer fled from the pressure. Dren remained above the chain, sawing at the wooden pin with his knife. A calf pushed through the lower rails and became trapped at the hips. Its mother turned and began goring the fence. Taren climbed onto the western barrier and ran along the top. He could not reach Dren directly. The moving herd filled the ground between them. Instead, he fired at the chain support from 40 paces and a steep downward angle. The stone ram gift settled the shot. The arrow split the pin beside Dren's hand. The chain fell. Dren kicked the gate outward and jumped onto the crossbar as cows surged beneath him. The eastern side opened, and the first cows flowed down the river corridor. Taren and Nerys followed along the west ridge, while Dren stayed above the herd and kept calves from turning back. By late morning, after more than 2 hours of descent, the leading animals reached the lower holding works above Rime Hollow. Brock had arrived by the ridge cutoff. Mail ordered the southern horns sounded. 3 long notes came from beside the lower channel. Workers pulled a rope gate across the opening, turning the lead cows toward the holding pen beside the boom. Mail stood on a raised wagon platform above the water, brass weight chain visible against his teal coat. He shouted that the basin closure had no magistrate seal, and the drive was company property. Nerys answered with the safety charter. Her voice disappeared beneath horns and hooves. Brock held the lower holding gate. The structure had been built from the repaired timbers of the collapsed upper pen. Company workers tried to lower a heavy timber leaf, while young bulls entered the chute. Brock put his spear through the chainwheel and held it. The turning handle struck his forearm. 2 workers pulled from the other side. A bull hit the gate. The impact drove Brock to 1 knee. The spear shaft bowed. Village volunteers seized his belt and shoulders. Together, they kept the leaf from dropping across the animals' backs. Taren moved toward the river platform. Iron Crown reached it first. The old bull had seen the southern rope gate close. He entered the chute, drove his right horn beneath 1 rail, and lifted. The entire holding wall leaned outward. Workers scattered. 1 man became tangled in a dropped net. Another slipped between the platform wheels. It held skins taken from trapped animals during the previous days, along with the contract chest and survey records. The wagon blocked a narrow service lane behind the platform. Moving it required cutting the side tension line that supported the southern rope gate. Nerys saw Mail reach for the knife. That line turns the herd toward the river. Mail cut it anyway. The rope gate fell open at one end and swung like a door. The lead cows did not see freedom. They saw moving rope and workers. They turned downslope toward the river boom and the unfinished bridge. The whole herd followed. Taren reached the platform as a young bull charged along the service lane. Male stood beside the hide wagon with the cut rope in one hand. The wagon trapped him against the platform rail. His assistants had already jumped clear. Taren fired into the ground between the bull's forelegs. The heavy arrow struck stone beneath shallow soil. Dirt and splinters burst upward. The animal checked one stride, enough for Taren to cross the lane. He caught Male by the front of the teal coat and threw him over the platform rail. The young bull hit the wagon. One wheel broke. Hides and ledgers spilled across the lane. Taren rolled beneath the platform as the axle passed above his shoulder. Male landed in mud on the riverside. Taren pulled him upright. The factor looked at the scattered records and tried to turn back. Taren locked one hand around his arm. The Wolverine grip made resistance pointless. You are coming to the village. Those books prove company ownership. They also prove what you cut. Rain struck the river in large, separate drops. Up the lower lane, Iron Crown broke the holding wall. The timber leaf fell away from Brock. Cows, calves, and young bulls poured toward the boom. Dren ran along the eastern edge, using the old deer trail to draw part of the herd away from the service lane. Nerys gathered injured company workers and sent them behind the stone trough. Brock lifted the fallen gate enough for 2 trapped men to crawl out. The drive ended in scattered people, panicked animals, and a river moving beyond every plan. Thunder rolled over the western ridge. The river began to rise. The first animals reached Rime Hollow before the warning runners. 3 cows and 2 calves came down the eastern trail, crossed a turnip field, and stopped at the river because the water had swallowed the usual ford. Villagers drove them north with blankets and wagon boards. Then Dren appeared on the ridge behind them, waving both arms and shouting that the rest of the herd was coming. Mira heard the company horns in the distance. She placed Iva in Elka's arms before anyone asked her to leave the square. The midwife and Selda took the child to the stone storehouse beside the old mill, the safest building above flood level. Iva caught the edge of Mira's blue shawl and protested when it slipped through her fingers. Mira kissed the pale lock above her daughter's brow, then returned to the bridge board. She assigned work by location rather than strength. Pela and 4 older children moved flour, ledgers, and lamp oil to the upper floor of the common hall. Selda's eldest daughter took the household list and checked names as families reported. 2 fishermen launched shallow boats and tied them near the lower houses. Farmers opened every fence between the eastern trail and the northern meadow, so frightened animals would not meet blind corners. Hob climbed the common store roof, inspected the lower river boom through his far lens, and swore. The company had chained black pine logs across the side channel, 300 paces upstream, using 2 lengths of lighter haul chain from its own wagons. Branches, broken fence rails, and whole tree trunks already collected against it. Water rose behind the barrier and spilled across the lower work road. Because the river ran almost straight from the boom to Rime Hollow, a full break would send the released mass into the western bank below the village within minutes and sweep through 6 low houses. If the boom held, the main channel would continue rising against the unfinished bridge, while the Ironhorn herd searched for a crossing. The spillway work Hob had begun after the first collapse now mattered. His crews had finished clearing the abandoned mill spillway on the southern bank and rebuilt its 2 timber gates. The old stone channel curved around the village and rejoined the river below a low houses. The near gate could be opened by hand. The far gate's lifting bar stood beyond the fastest water, on a pier no one could reach once the flood covered the maintenance path. The rebuilt messenger arrow hung beneath the bridge shelter. Its thick ash shaft carried a narrow iron head and a metal eye behind the fletching. A waxed cord passed through the eye. If Taren drove the arrow through the wet oak bar on the far pier, the villagers could use the cord to pull a heavy rope across and lift the release. After the failed first test, Taren had driven the rebuilt shaft through a soaked oak beam from the stable bank. The distance was long, but possible. The storm turned possible into uncertain. Hob placed the arrow and cord ready beneath the shelter before going to the near spill gate with Nerys. Her shoulder remained strapped, but her left hand worked well enough to guide rope and read the company chain rigging. Brock took 20 people to the eastern approach. They stretched 2 rope gates between barns, leaving a broad lane toward the unfinished bridge and the gravel shallows beyond it. The gates were not meant to stop the herd. They were meant to prevent a sudden turn into homes. Dren arrived with Taren and Mael as thunder reached the village. Mud covered all 3 men. Taren's gray coat had torn across the back. The black bow remained in his hand. He placed Mael under the watch of 2 councilmen beside the common hall and explained the drive-in as few words as possible. Mael demanded that the company records recovered from the broken wagon be protected from weather and theft. Mira told him the village was currently protecting people from his decisions. Then Selda's daughter reached the end of the household list. The Null family had not reported. Their cottage stood beyond the southern turn, below the new spillway outlet. An older couple lived there with a grandson whose leg had never healed correctly after a childhood break. They might not hear the horns through the storm. Mira sent Pela with a fisherman and one of the shallow boats. She marked all 3 names on a separate board and refused to cross them off until someone returned. The front of the Ironhorn herd appeared on the eastern ridge. Dark bodies moved through sheets of rain. Cows came first, calves pressed between them. Young bulls followed along both sides. Company workers ran behind the animals, some still carrying horns, others trying only to escape. Iron Crown moved near the rear. The harpoon chain dragged beneath him. Blood had darkened the charcoal coat around his shoulder. Every horn blast turned his head toward the sound. Brock opened the first rope gate. The lead cows entered the lane. Villagers struck fence boards on the southern side, leaving the northern direction quieter. Dren moved along the meadow edge, reading the herd's attention rather than its tracks. When one cow began to turn toward the common hall, he dropped his blue cap on a fence post and waved a gray blanket farther north. The color change drew her eyes. She followed the open lane. The method worked until the first calf reached the unfinished bridge. The permanent crossing had 2 main black pine beams resting on repaired stone piers. Hob had decked the northern half for work carts. The southern half remained temporary planks above a shallower gravel bar. People could cross. A calm cow could cross. A panicked herd could destroy it. The calf stepped onto the first board and stopped at the moving water below. Animals crowded behind it. Brock and 6 volunteers closed the rear rope gate to keep young bulls from pushing into the cows. The line pulled tight. Brock wrapped it around one forearm and planted both boots. Taren moved to the bridge entrance. He struck the black bow against a post once, then moved north along the rail. The lead cow followed the sound with her eyes. He walked onto the deck, giving her space to choose the same path. The cow stepped forward. The calf followed. One by one, the front animals began crossing. Behind them, the river boom groaned. A whole pine trunk had joined the debris. The barrier dipped, recovered, and pushed more water into the main channel. The bridge shook beneath Taren's feet. At the common hall, one of Mael's guards ran to help when a market awning tore loose and struck an old man. The second guard kept hold of Mael's sleeve. Mael saw a dark chest lodged on the upper work platform near the boom. His contract chest had fallen from the hide wagon during the drive and washed against the platform rail. Colored cords hung from the half-open lid. The documents inside recorded private claims, company expenses, trap orders, and a cut sideline. Mael pulled away from the remaining guard. The councilman caught his coat. A frightened young bull struck the outer rope gate at that moment. The post snapped. The loose line swept across the square and knocked the guard from his feet. Mael ran toward the upper platform. She sent no one after him. Every available person held a gate, a boat, a child, or a rope. She turned to Taren and pointed once. Taren followed. The work platform stood above the side channel where boom chains met the bridge materials. Water covered its lower steps. Mael reached the contract chest and pulled it against his body. The platform support shifted. One corner dropped. Mael fell between the rail and a stack of wet bridge planks. The chest struck the water, remained attached to his wrist by a carrying loop, and began dragging him through the gap. Taren reached the first step as the platform tore away from the bank. He shot an arrow through the upper rail and into a black pine post behind it. The shaft held long enough for him to use the bow as a handhold and jump onto the tilting deck. Mail had one arm pinned beneath the planks. The contract chest hung in the current below him. "Cut the strap," Taren said. Mail tried with his free hand. The knife slipped from his glove and vanished. Taren drew his own blade and cut the carrying loop. The chest disappeared beneath the platform, struck a lower brace, and lodged there. Mail reached after it. The platform dropped again. Taren caught the back of the teal coat. His Wolverine's strengthened grip closed around wet cloth and held. He pulled Mail free of the planks and drove both of them toward the bank as the outer half of the platform broke away. They landed against the stone abutment. Mail looked back at the chest. The contracts are there. So is the river. Choose what you can breathe. Taren tied Mail to the bridge shelter post with rescue rope, high enough above the water to remain safe, and close enough that the Factor could see the results of his drive. A bellow rose from the eastern lane. Iron Crown had reached the bridge. The old bull came through rain with half a fence dragging behind him. The harpoon chain had wrapped around a broken rail during the descent. Each stride tore another board from the ground. Workers scattered from the lane. Iron Crown struck the final post with his shoulder and entered the bridge approach behind the herd. 20 cows and calves had already crossed to the northern meadow. More stood on the deck. Young bulls crowded near Brock's rear gate. The route could still work if the animals kept moving. Iron Crown heard the chain behind him. He turned toward it, saw the broken fence striking his wounded shoulder, and attacked the nearest motion. His right horn lifted the rail. The timber spun across the lane and hit the bridge entrance. The lead cows stopped. Pressure built through the herd. Taren stepped onto the bridge and struck the loose chain with the iron tip of an arrow. The sharp metallic sound cut through rain. Iron Crown looked at him. Taren struck it again and moved toward the unfinished southern side of the deck, away from the cows. The bull followed one step, then another. Dren understood the separation. He climbed the northern rail beyond the cows and dropped into the gravel shallows. From there, he moved along the edge of the water, tapping stones and opening a quieter path toward the north meadow. The lead cow watched him. When Taren struck the chain again, the herd's attention split. The cows moved toward the softer sound of water and Dren's gray blanket. Iron Crown moved toward the meadow. Brock kept the young bulls from entering behind him. The rear rope gate bowed against 5,000 pounds of frightened animal. Brock stood at the center, with the line around his waist. Volunteers held both ends. One post leaned. "Move them or I become part of the bridge," he shouted. Nerys and Hob reached the near spill gate below the southern bank. They removed the locking tin and pulled. The gate rose one handspan, then stopped against debris in the channel. Water began entering the old spillway, but not enough. The far gate remained closed. Taren led Iron Crown onto the central deck. The bull's hooves struck black pine planks with deep separate blows. The right horn remained whole and long. The broken left horn forced his head to tilt whenever he turned. Rain ran down the white stripe on his face. The harpoon moved inside the swollen shoulder with every step. Taren had 2 heavy arrows left in the quiver on his back, plus the messenger shaft beneath the shelter. He could not spend both and leave no way to open the spillway. He set the first. Iron Crown charged. The unfinished rail gave Taren little room to move. Cows still crossed behind the bull. A missed arrow might enter the herd. He waited until the old animal filled the clear section of bridge and released into the left shoulder, aiming to break the charge rather than force a heart shot through the harpoon wound. The heavy shaft entered deep behind the iron head. Iron Crown staggered. Then he drove forward. Pain had carried him through fences, smoke, chains, and men. One more wound changed direction rather than purpose. The bull swung his head from left to right. The complete horns swept across the bridge. Taren stepped inside the outer curve. The broken left horn passed near his ribs. He struck the bull's face with the bow and moved toward the north rail. Iron Crown turned early with the right shoulder, compensating for the missing length on the left. The movement caught Taren before he cleared it. The base of the right horn struck his side. Bare vitality kept the ribs from breaking, but the force lifted him. He hit the unfinished rail. Wet wood split beneath his back. Taren fell through the bridge. His right hand closed around a lower beam. The river pulled at his legs. One boot struck a cross brace. The black bow hung from his left wrist by its leather loop. Above him, Iron Crown turned on the deck. Hooves broke another board. The Wolverine gift held Taren's fingers around the rain-slick beam. He drew one knee upward and found a narrow diagonal brace with his toe. Stone ram balance turned the sloping wood into a path. He moved beneath the deck while the bull searched above. Dren saw Taren fall. He did not abandon the herd to run toward him. He kept guiding the cows into the shallows, trusting the grip he had watched save men at the collapsed pen. That decision cleared 3 more animals from the bridge. Brock's rear post tore halfway from the ground. A young bull pushed its horns beneath the rope. Brock released one wrap from his waist before it could crush him, stepped to the side, and used the loose line to turn the animal's head toward the open lane. 2 volunteers followed. The rear group began moving instead of pressing. Below the bridge, Taren reached the central support. The old stone pier remained sound. The new timber cap above it had shifted under Iron Crown's weight. One retaining strap was missing because the ordered iron had not yet arrived. Hob had replaced it temporarily with doubled rope. The rope fibers were separating. Taren climbed the diagonal brace and emerged through the broken rail behind the bull. Iron Crown turned at the sound of the bow striking wood. Taren now understood the pattern. The broken left horn made the bull protect that side by rotating the right shoulder sooner. Every turn opened the line behind the right foreleg for less than a heartbeat. He had one killing arrow. The bull charged again. Taren backed toward the unfinished southern planks. The deck narrowed. Water showed through gaps beneath his boots. He could not move sideways without entering the herd's route or falling into the main channel. He needed the turn. Taren waited until Iron Crown lowered his head, then moved left toward the broken horn. The bull compensated exactly as before. The right shoulder came forward early. The long horn crossed the space Taren had occupied. Taren dropped under the neck and passed close enough to smell wet hide and infected blood. He did not shoot. The angle behind the foreleg opened, but a cow remained in line beyond the bull. He rolled to the side and rose near the central support. Iron Crown struck the southern rail and turned. The herd behind him thinned. Dren had moved most cows off the deck. 2 calves and their mothers remained. Brock still managed the young bulls at the entrance. Hob shouted from the spillway that the far gate was taking the full pressure. The boom had begun shedding logs. They had minutes before the barrier released everything at once. Taren drew the last heavy arrow. Iron Crown stopped 6 paces away and stood breathing hard. Foam and rain mixed around the mouth. The chain beneath his shoulder had caught around one foreleg. He lifted the hoof, struck the planks, and freed it. The wounds explained Iron Crown's fury. He had guarded the herd through a reopened migration route, then endured a harpoon, a chain, firelight, and collapsing fences. The complete right horn still pointed toward a bridge crowded with animals and people. The final 2 calves left the deck. Dren raised one arm from the shallows. The line beyond Iron Crown was clear. Taren lowered the arrow point a fraction. The bull charged. The central cap rope broke. One side of the deck dropped. The black pine beam beneath Taren tilted toward the river. Iron Crown lost one step, recovered, and came on. Taren's feet adjusted with the motion. The stone ram gift held his hips above the moving beam. He drew while the bridge fell beneath him. The angle changed faster than an ordinary hunter could follow. The bull's right shoulder turned early. The space behind the foreleg opened. Taren released. The black bow drove the heavy shaft through rain, hide, and the narrow gap between ribs. The arrow entered behind the right foreleg and passed deep toward the heart. Iron Crown struck the lowered beam with both front hooves. The impact carried him another 3 steps. One horn broke the last southern rail. His shoulder passed Taren by less than a handspan. Then the front legs folded. The old bull fell toward the outer side of the deck, away from the herd path. His body struck the planks and stopped against the remaining rail. The broken chain slid into the river. Taren kept the bow raised until the chest ceased moving. Quarry claimed. Iron Crown, leader of Redgrass. Rooted force settles in the hunter. Deep passage settles in the bow. The gift entered through his feet. Every joint from ankle to spine aligned beneath him. The swinging beam stopped dictating his balance. He felt the weight of the bridge, the river pressing against the pier, and his own body as one connected line. The black bow grew denser in his hand. Silver grain brightened beneath the rain. Brock opened the rear rope gate. The young bulls entered the bridge lane and turned toward Dren's shallow route. No body blocked them. Iron Crown lay along the outer rail, leaving the center open. Taren stepped around the fallen animal. The boom broke its first chain. A black pine log rolled over the barrier. The main mass behind it shifted. Water rose against the bridge pier and struck the drop's deck from below. Hobbs shouted for the messenger arrow. Taren ran to the shelter. The thick ash shaft lay beneath canvas with waxed cord coiled around a peg. Mail remained tied to the post beside it, rainwater running from his chestnut hair. He looked at Iron Crown and then at the debris wall above the bridge. If the boom goes, the records wagon and every lower house are lost, he said. Taren lifted the messenger arrow. The wagon is already lost. The far spillway gate stood across 60 paces of violent water. Its wet oak lifting bar rose above the stone pier. Hobb and Nerys had opened the near gate only a foot. Water rushed into the old channel, but struck the closed far section and backed up. The first plan had been to bury the messenger arrow through the lifting bar, pull the waxed cord across, attach a full rope, and use the rope to raise the release pin from a distance. The shot required a stable stance and penetration through soaked oak. Half the bridge moved beneath Taren. He planted both feet on the slanted central beam. Rooted force locked his legs to the structure without freezing them. He leaned into the pressure instead of fighting each motion. The new weight in the bow settled behind the arrow. Hobbs signaled when the far bar appeared between waves of spray. Taren drew. The waxed cord pulled at the arrow eye. Wind pushed rain across the line. The old bow would have lost speed to both. The black U held every part of the draw. He released. The messenger shaft crossed the side channel and struck the center of the oak bar. The narrow head passed through. The reinforced shoulder buried deep enough that the shaft did not pull free. The waxed cord stretched between banks. Hobb tied the end to a thicker guide rope. Brock and 6 villagers pulled from the bridge shelter, drawing the rope through the metal eye behind the arrow. Nerys attached the heavy lifting line and shouted for them to continue. The main line reached the far bar. They wrapped it around the near winch. Hobb did not open the far gate all at once. A sudden release would move the flood rather than control it. He called for 1/4 turn. Brock and the others pushed the winch handles. The far release pin rose. Water entered the old spillway in a dark wall. The stone channel shook. Pela's boat appeared below with the Null family aboard, clearing the outlet moments before the first surge reached it. Mira saw all 3 missing names and crossed them from her board. Hobb called for another 1/4 turn. The winch moved. More water left the main channel. The pressure against the boom lowered by inches. One final chain snapped upstream. Logs rolled forward, but the weakened current turned part of the debris into the open spillway. The largest trunk struck the stone divider, broke in 2, and passed on opposite sides of the bridge pier. The unfinished deck groaned and remained standing. For the next hour, no one stopped. Dren guided the last cows through the shallows. Brock and the volunteers freed 2 young bulls caught in the rope lane. Nerys crawled along the near spill gate and cut away branches with her good arm. Hobb adjusted the water release 1 turn at a time. Mira sent dry blankets, counted injuries, and moved people away from any building whose foundation softened. Taren climbed beneath the bridge to lash the broken cap beam to the stone pier. Rooted strength let him hold position while currents struck his legs. The Wolverine grip kept the rope in his hands. Stone ram balance held him on the angled brace. His new strength worked inside a plan built by Hob, Mira, Dren, Brock, Neris, and every hand on the ropes. The last Ironhorn calf reached the North Meadow near dusk. Its mother followed and stopped beneath the trees. The herd gathered beyond her, wet and exhausted, while the company horns remained silent. Hob locked the spillway winch. Brock sat down in the mud, and Taren returned to the bridge deck where Iron Crown lay. Mael stood beside the shelter post with the cut rescue rope at his feet. Mira had ordered him untied once the immediate danger passed. 2 council witnesses remained beside him. The factor looked across the damaged bridge, the diverted river, his injured workers, and the living herd beyond the meadow. The brass weight was gone from his hand. The storm left work instead of victory. 2 lower sheds had flooded to the windows. 1 grain cellar filled with mud. 6 sacks from the common store became wet before Pela's crew moved them, and Oren ordered the grain spread immediately across every dry floor in the hall. 3 company workers had broken bones. 9 villagers carried cuts, strains, or bruises. Brock's left forearm swelled until he could not close his hand. No one died. The Knoll family slept in Selda's house, while neighbors raised their cottage floor with salvaged stone. The fisherman who brought them out received 3 new planks for his damaged boat from Hobbs' bridge pile. Every loss entered Mira's ledger, beside the name of the person who had seen it. Mael remained in the common hall under rotating council watch through the night, and signed a temporary damage agreement the next morning. He did not confess to every accusation. He acknowledged that company orders had begun a drive during a disputed closure, that the southern tension line had been cut to move the hide wagon, and that village bridge timber and company haul chain had been used in the river boom. In exchange for protection of injured workers and safe storage of remaining company goods, he transferred both unused, heavy bridge chains from the camp. 12 iron straps, 2 wagons, all unused spikes, the camp's bridge tools, and 16 sacks of salt to the village, pending the magistrate's ruling. The transferred equipment gave the village enough material to begin repairs, while every loss remained entered in Mira's ledger. Neris and 5 workers signed witness statements. Dren attached his maps. The council added the trap register, false stakes, drive plan, cut line, and recovered orders from the records chest. The chest itself had survived beneath the broken platform. Taren recovered it after the water fell. Mael watched him place the swollen ledgers on the common hall table. Pages had blurred at the edges, but the signed instructions remained readable. Survey Deputy Alwyn arrived 2 days later on foot because his wagon could not cross the temporary bridge. He was a narrow older man with dust on his boots and no interest in village applause. He spent 3 days measuring stones, comparing charters, questioning workers separately, and following the original blaze line into Redgrass Basin. His first ruling was temporary rather than grand. He confirmed the damage agreement as valid security for repairs, while the regional case remained open. The Northern Fur Company's hunting charter inside the disputed Upper Valley was suspended until a regional hearing. Its workers could recover personal equipment under council escort, but could set no trap, drive no herd, and buy no exclusive claim. Mael had to travel south with Alwyn and answer for the altered boundary orders, an unsafe operation. The larger company might appeal. Its investors might deny Mael's authority. Those questions belonged to later courts. Rime Hollow kept the evidence, the compensation listed in the temporary agreement, and the right to enforce common migration routes under its council charter. Neris did not return south with Mael. Her contract allowed termination when the company broke the attached safety code and failed to evacuate injured workers. Daris Fen offered her seasonal work surveying leather sources. Neris accepted only after helping Dren finish an accurate map of the Upper Valley. Iron Crown was used completely. Oren inspected the wound and found infection around the old harpoon. The meat near the shoulder was burned. The rest was divided among households, injured workers, and a common smokehouse. The great charcoal hide entered the public fund. Darius purchased it only after open bidding, paying partly in coin and partly in finished bridge fittings. Hob cut the broken left horn into durable plates for the bridge gates. The full right horn went south with Darius for a price that covered medicine, damaged grain, and the Null family's repairs. A small, cracked piece remained beneath Whitemane's hide in the common hall. A carved line beneath the horn recorded the company drive and the lives endangered when the bull entered the village bridge. The Iron Horn herd stayed in Redgrass Basin for 12 days after the storm. Oren and Dren observed it from a distance. 2 cows carried minor rope wounds. Several calves limped, then recovered. When the grass along the northern route dried, the herd shifted onto the eastern side of the basin beneath the open pass, but remained there to feed. The council set its first summer quota while the animals remained under observation. No Ironhorn cow or calf could be taken. 2 old bulls might be hunted after midsummer if Dren confirmed that they traveled apart from the breeding herd. Steel jaw traps required registration and could not be set near common paths. Fences across migration routes required a public vote. Dren became the first elected keeper of hunting paths. He protested that 19 was too young for a title. Brock said he had been old enough to insult people on cliffs. The vote remained. Dren's work included mapping, checking traps, recording injured animals, and bringing disputes to the council. He carried no authority to seize a legal kill or set prices. His blue cap remained patched with a strip cut from the horse signal. Brock organized a volunteer rescue crew. The group kept ropes, litters, blankets, axes, and 2 small boats in the stone mill. Company workers who had survived the pen collapse contributed 1 pulley and 3 waterproof packs before leaving. Brock drilled farmers in knots until even Hob admitted that his hands were useful for more than breaking doors. The second open market began 5 weeks after the flood. This time 6 buyers came. Kelm claimed credit for all of them, including 2 who had learned of Rhyme Hollow from Darius. His orange gloves moved constantly as he collected the commission written beside his name. Mira no longer managed every table herself. Zelda's eldest daughter kept the main price ledger. Jory recorded bridge labor and repayment shares. 2 hunters graded raw hides under Oren's supervision. Mira reviewed the totals from a bench near the common hall, with Eva, now nearly 7 months old, sitting against her knees. The child had learned to reach accurately. She caught the brass weight Kelm used to test the public scale and refused to return it until he traded her a smooth wooden bead. Taren watched from the bridge. The permanent crossing now rested on strapped black pine beams. Both heavy chains controlled a lifting section near the southern bank. Hobbs' spillway gates stood open enough to keep spring debris from gathering against the piers. A board listed tolls for foreign wagons, 1 copper for a light load and 2 for a heavy one. Residents crossed without charge. Every toll entered a separate repair ledger. The bridge had cost labor from 50 households, winter reserve coin, market fees, Kelm's small loan, company compensation, and Darius's advance orders. The straps, spikes, and hinge plates ordered through Kelm and Corin arrived during the repairs and were entered beside the households responsible for paying them. Ownership remained with the village that had recorded every contribution. Midsummer sunlight reached Redgrass Basin in long, clear bands. Taren returned there with Dren to inspect the northern blazes. His gray coat was repaired at the shoulder. The silver lock remained bright against black hair. The thin scar crossed his left eyebrow. The black bow rested in his hand, almost motionless even when wind moved the grass. Silver grain curved along its limbs. Mira's faded blue binding still marked the old repair. They found the herd on a distant slope. An old cow moved at the rear, with a calf beside her. The calf had grown enough to test its short horns against red grass stalks. Other animals spread across the basin, feeding toward the eastern pass. Dren raised the far lens and confirmed that no marked old bull traveled alone. The season's Ironhorn quota remained closed. Taren watched the cow and calf until they crossed the ridge. He carried enough food at home The common store was full. The bridge fund had coin. An animal could stand within range of the strongest bow in the valley and remain alive, because the people using the forest had decided what tomorrow was worth. They returned to Rhyme Hollow by evening. Market wagons crossed the new bridge beneath the posted toll board. Brock stood beside the mill, teaching 3 teenagers how to secure a litter without cutting off a wounded person's breathing. Hob shouted from the lifting chain because someone had greased the wrong wheel. Oren sat in the shade, insulting a basket of poorly dried herbs. Mira waited near the market tables, with Iva on her lap. Her copper braid lay over one shoulder. The dark blue shawl covered both mother and child against the cooling air. Eva saw Taren and reached toward the silver lock in his hair. He lifted her. She caught the lock with one hand and the faded blue binding on a bow with the other. Mira showed him the day's ledger. Bridge tolls had paid for 2 replacement boards. Darius's leather order had funded winter seed. The final copper of Kelm's loan had been repaid, and he had written the fact 3 times. Taren looked across the river at the road leading south. Mail had arrived with iron, contracts, and enough money to make dependents look like rescue. He had left under a magistrate's escort, while the road remained open behind him. Iron Crown's hide had paid for fittings, but the posted tolls, shared records, mapped boundaries, and seasonal quotas would keep the bridge and forest working after Taren left the square. Mira closed the ledger and asked whether he had found legal quarry. Not today. Then you can repair the roof over the salt shed. Taren looked at Hob, who immediately found urgent work on the opposite side of the bridge. Eva pulled his hair harder. He carried her toward the shed, while Mira followed with the black bow. Behind them, the new bridge held beneath the weight of 3 loaded wagons, and the river passed cleanly through its open piers.